The HOA president and board will never be the same after they get exposed for what they do in this story. Get ready, it's a wild ride. I bought my home in 2001 in a 42-home community. We bought right after 9/11, and we picked the community because the HOA fees were very low at just $51. It wasn't long after that we bought the home in the community. We got a sweet deal because of this, and the business had really slowed after 9/11 before those dues started going up. I was 22 at the time. Looking into the financial reports and into the meetings, it became very clear why the dues were going up. The board was a little fiefdom set up by the developers of the homes. Our management company was a subsidiary corporation of the home builder, and the board members were a combination of one of the home developers and two of the very first home purchasers in the community, a 3-person board. The first action the board took with that increase in funds was to remove trees that were not even on the HOA's property. They were trees that sat in an area that the HOA had access to for weed abatement. These trees' real crime was not that they were weeds, it was that they blocked the nice view of the board's president and vice president. At the same time, the bullcrap violation letters started going out to about half of the homes. You aren't mowing enough. You aren't watering enough. Every petty thing that you can think of, they were issuing warning letters and starting to fine homeowners. Cue revenge time after getting one of those letters myself about weed abatement. Ironically, it was researching the community's CC&Rs about weed abatement that led me to realize the trees that were cut were not on HOA property, and it was researching the annual budget that led me to finding out the huge weed abatement expense that was actually the community's funds being spent to remove trees solely for the 2 board members' homeowners' views. I then found out that in California, all anyone needs to initiate a recall of the entire board and install a new one, if successful, was the signatures of 5% of the homeowners delivered to the current board. That's a total of 3 houses in a 42-home community. The board was issued a recall notice not 48 hours after that I'd found out about the law, delivered to the management company in person. Ironically, the home builder's corporate office was in the exact same building as the management company. You think they would have wanted to not make their association so obvious, but hey, it was 2002. This is also when I found out that the management company basically had the entire board in its pocket because they dragged their feet with the recall vote. They set it as far out as they could by law in the middle of the day. Instead of holding it in the community like all board meetings, they set the place at a local park a couple of miles away. They thought they were so brilliant doing this. So, me and my wife put together a proxy voting form for the election, and we went to every door in our community. We told them what was happening with their money, their plans to create an architecture committee that would require all homeowners to get approvals for any additions or changes, and everything. It took us 3 rounds around the neighborhood, plus a couple of extra visits to homes that had not answered initially. In the end, me and my wife had 26 revocable proxies for the election. For those unfamiliar with proxies, it basically gave me and my wife the power to cast that homeowner's vote for them, if and only if they didn't show up to the election. The thoughtless board and management company actually made it easier for us to collect the proxies, because a lot of homeowners flat out could not make the time and place of the meeting. The recall day finally arrives. The current board members are all there, the management company representative is there, and 8 other homeowners showed up to the meeting, 6 of whom we had proxies for and which were revoked by their attendance. They opened the meeting and started saying something about, "Oh, looks like a waste of money, there isn't a quorum, blah blah." I then said, "I'm sorry, but we do have a quorum." They're like, "No you don't, you need 22 homeowners here, and there's only 12. The 3 board members, me and wifey, and the 8 others that showed up. And that's when I pulled out the trump card. I dropped all 26 proxies on the bench table that everyone was sitting at and said, "Hey, I'm sorry, but there are more than 30 homeowners present," and then I pointed out the math. After subtracting the 6 homeowners that had showed up, we had 20 additional proxy votes that counted for both quorum and voting purposes. They all got wide-eyed, most especially the management company representative. He came over and looked at the forms very closely and compared it against a list of the homeowners. Even the people that were there and on our side did not realize how much work we had done to ensure the bullcrap ended there and now. The recall meeting was opened. The board members voted not to recall, plus their 3 friends that were on their side. The other homeowners present voted to recall, and the vote stood at 6-6, tied. I then stood and declared that we were voting our 20 valid proxy votes to recall the entire board. Recall passed, 26 votes to 6. The next vote, who replaces the board members? It ended up becoming me and wifey and another homeowner that had voted for the recall and was willing to take the seat. We elected ourselves to the board seats by a vote of 26-6. It was at this point that the management company then stated that Cannon Management was immediately resigning as the management company for the community. I then pulled out the HOA's management contract, which clearly stated that either side needed to give 3 months' notice to effect resignation, and stated that we, the new board, accepted their resignation and set an end date for their services 3 months later. The management guy was nuclear ticked off. I, a 22-year-old kid at the time, had beaten them at their game, and I had prepared for their possible quitting shenanigan. We replaced the management company after a couple of months, having had proper time to find and vet an independent company, at about half the cost, no less. Did the same with the gardening services, which was also a home builder affiliated company, also at about half the cost. The old president of the HOA put his home up for sale about a month later after we rescinded all the old violations and issued a notice to the old board members that we intended to vote on whether they had committed fraud against the association over their weed abatement tree removal action. I still vividly remember walking over to Dale's house, the old president, the day that he was moving and giving him a big wave goodbye as he was getting into the car to follow his moving truck. He gave me the finger as he drove out. Definitely one of the proudest moments in my life. Is this not full HOA takedown? They don't think you're going to do it, but you do your research and you take them out. What would you do? You can't put a lien on your house, not in your community. Posted by Tough Cookie 24/7. So this happened years ago when I was in elementary school, so maybe 15 years ago, and I was living in Florida at the time. Anyone who lives in Florida knows how often new gated communities just pop up. So our neighborhood was established and has been before I even moved into the house. The house once belonged to my uncle. We had a neighborhood watch, but no HOA. The gated community was finally built and the people were moving in. Now, we don't have a bad neighborhood, but we had some strange colored houses, lime green and magenta with giant metal lizards hanging all over it, is an example of one. Our house was simple. Hand brick and half concrete painted white. It stood out compared to some of the other houses. The new gated community is an HOA community. They thought that they ruled over all. Soon, people in our neighborhood were receiving fines for their house color choices, their unsightly cars, not approved mailboxes, and other nitpicky things. My parents received some for my dad's boat being in the driveway, and even our unruly yard. We had a bougainvillea, which is vines, and which grows like crazy, and we were constantly trimming it. And we even got a fine for our fence. The old fence was chain link, and the new fence was a wooden privacy fence. Don't ask why we had 2 different fences. My uncle only fenced in part of the house. It was still good fence, so my dad didn't want to rip it out. Well, my mom and dad would just pitch anything they saw coming from that gated community as they had fancy stationery. This went on for maybe 4 or 5 months. We would receive fines for not meeting HOA standards and other violations. We talked to our neighbors and they received them too. They tried to call and complain but were given the runaround and decided to pitch the mail as well. My mom received a phone call from her bank. They started to question her about the lien on the house that had just appeared in the system. My parents had less than a year left on their payments for the house. They always paid extra every month for the house loan and were always on time. My mom was super confused and said that there shouldn't be a lien. We don't have any reason for there to be a lien. Turns out the gated community filed liens on almost every house in my neighborhood. My mom told the bank the situation and called a lawyer. I'm not sure what all happened, but I know a lot of the members of that HOA faced felony fraud charges, and it was just a huge mess with a pretty big lawsuit against the HOA board. We were able to pay off the house after the lawsuit. We even had a big celebration on one of the roads, a huge cookout, and we met people that we didn't know before. I even made new friends with some kids that I didn't even know existed. People moved out of the gated community due to bad press, and a lot of the houses stood empty for a long time. When I moved away, there were still a lot of houses empty, and it was like a ghost town. Last I heard, the name of the community changed and the houses were being filled up. So I guess the lesson is, leave our bright houses alone and mind your own business. Nothing like a crooked HOA that tries to break the law get taken down with fraud. Fake HOAs. Okay, so we started renting our current property back in 2014. Our landlord is a close friend and bought this place specifically for us to live in without worry of being homeless. Anyway, we had lived here for almost a year, and then one day we got a letter stating that we were behind on our water payment by so-and-so months and how much we owed. Now, we knew nothing about this, and honestly, I don't think our landlord knew either, because he had several long-term rental housing. So I go and I talk to the water lady, and I apologized about not paying and where I needed to go to send the payment. This is me thinking some kind of water company. She told me to pay it to her with cash or cashier's check. Right off the bat, red flags were going off, but I obliged and I paid. It was only $30 a month. Now, we don't live in an urban area, we are in a rural farm area, and almost everyone on the main street has some kind of livestock, be it horses and cows and so on. Many fields, heck, my own horse is just a quarter-mile down the road from us. Oh, and there's a fully functioning dairy on the next street over, and one of the best breeding facilities in our state on the same main road about 4 miles from us. So, yeah, we're rural. The whole water payment thing I thought was strange. While talking to the water lady, I found out that the properties are on a shared well. Okay, pretty uncommon in this area, but whatever. Oh, and also the water has uranium in it, and we have to use the reverse osmosis system in our house for any drinking and cooking water, which would have been great to know before even considering moving in. We thought that was a basic filtration system to filter the sand from the water, so that was a huge shock. Now that that information was out, we figured, well, if it's to pay for the upkeep of the reverse osmosis systems in the 60-ish houses in the neighborhood and maintain the well, it wasn't a huge impact on our income, so why not? The problem started about a year later. The reverse osmosis system was leaking. Actually, it destroyed the flooring in our kitchen twice, which we had to pay for the repairs to the house that is required to have this system under our sink. Now, this was before I learned about water alarms. I found out about those 2 years later and not from the water board. I had contacted the water lady multiple times to have it fixed, to no avail, and we had to disconnect the filtration system because no matter what we did, it wouldn't stop leaking. Fast forward about 2 years. All of a sudden, people I had never met before were demanding to reinstall the system. But we said no, because we didn't want it to cost more money in damages. The president of the HOA, which was the first time that I'd heard of any HOA since living here, told me that if I didn't let them reinstall the reverse osmosis system in the house, she would make the DEQ force me to install it. So, after that wonderful interaction, I decided to call the DEQ about this situation, and this is when I find out about the water alarm. I told the guy that's in charge of this specific area, and he literally laughed and said, "Miss, I can't force you to do anything, let alone step on the property without your permission." He had told me that other neighbors had told him some suspicious stuff and to contact him if any other problems arise. So, out of sheer curiosity, I decided to look up the so-called HOA. Well, slap me with a fish. Sure as heck, active HOA, but wasn't activated until 2019? The math ain't mathing here. Well, like we done previously, we complied. We let them install the reverse osmosis. The guy actually had to replace it because it was just not usable anymore, and he had asked me when the last time it was serviced was. Well, I told him, it hadn't been serviced since we lived here, and when I tried to get them to come fix it, they wouldn't. And he responded with a, that's odd. Shortly after that, our water lady was taken off the water board because she was unable to do what was needed mentally, and yes, I noticed, and was replaced by the now so-called secretary treasurer. Okay, whatever. Now, about a year after that, we get this notice stating that the water bill was being raised from $30 to $45 a month. Okay, fine. But our reverse osmosis system wasn't being tended to, and we were all told not to tamper with them in any shape or form. So basically, since we got the new reverse osmosis system, they haven't replaced the filters, and there's nothing we can do about it. Now, about 3-ish months ago, they held a meeting to vote to raise the water bill again. We were unable to attend the meeting, and also we weren't allowed to vote, but they decided to send us this huge explanation of why it needed to be raised and so on. Many people in the neighborhood were unable to attend because of work or other things, but somehow they got, I think it was a 38-38 vote to raise it. Huh? They raised it from $45 to $60, and now look, I know some of you guys probably pay more than that, but for us, that was a huge increase in such a short time span. So one of our neighbors asked us what we voted, and we told him, well, we weren't allowed to vote, and he asked why, and we told him because we don't own our house. And he said, well, I don't either, but I was able to vote, and I voted no, and so did many other neighbors. That was when things started getting super red flags blaring around. So around July 16th, we got a letter in the mail stating rules, many of which conflict with our state laws. So I decided to look up the state's rules and regulations regarding HOAs. And after doing some digging and finding out that they cannot raise the dues by more than 10% in a year, which they obviously did raise it more than 10%, which led me to somehow look up the HOA itself. There was an original HOA that started in 1981, but it was dissolved and forfeited in 1983, and there was no HOA until October of 2019, and it was administratively dissolved and revoked in 2021. They are still forcing dues using fear tactics to make people comply the works. There are a couple of houses for sale in our neighborhood, and one says no HOA, and the other says HOA fees $30 monthly. I don't know what to do, honestly. This is the first time that I've ever had to deal with an HOA, and obviously they're breaking laws, getting renters kicked out of their houses, just the works, and I feel like it's only a matter of time before we're going to have to move because of the HOA board pestering our landlord. The only reason we complied is to keep peace. But now that we know we're having our money stolen from us for years, it's infuriating. If we could just up and move, we would, but we can't, and we have to deal with these people. Any advice on what to do would be helpful. Also, we have no common areas unless you want to count the area where the water pumps are, which no one but board members and a landscaping company are allowed to go on. That is also the only area that the HOA owns. All the land in the houses are owned by someone. OP and the HOA engineers bring the heat to a Karen in illegal wall building neighbor gets her 7-foot wall torn down and rebuilt, posted by deleted. The next door neighbor and my dad have this old enmity because of a small invisible line between our house and theirs outside in the street, even though any space past the gate or fence is public property. And the neighbors were complaining that our trash bags were getting onto their grass. To define that line, my dad built a small 2-foot concrete wall, kind of like the Great Wall of China or the Berlin Wall. You get the idea. Fast forward a few quiet years later, the neighbor starts building a new wall directly next and against the dining room wall. The entire side stretches about 60 feet long. Over 9 a.m. breakfast, you can hear the guy slapping concrete blocks on the dang thing. And it's pretty terrifying because the wall is years old. I mean, the house is years old too. So it has a fairly nice chance of breaking and falling. Not to mention that the original kitchen and dining room wall is only about 6 feet tall. The neighbor is building a freaking 7-foot wall. Because my dad oversaw the reconstruction of the house, he's also an engineer, by the way, he knows the ups and downs and laws of house construction in our area. But just to be sure, he asked my lawyer godmother for some legal help and the rules from the Homeowners Association HOA engineers as well. So you can't build a wall over 6 feet without a permit, and if you start building over 6 feet, either you've got a hefty fine to pay and get a permit, or it gets knocked down, pay a fine, get a permit, and restart construction. Then he knocks on the neighbor's door and asks about the wall. The guy that comes out is the son, and he's pretty chill to talk to. And then my dad asked, "Is there a permit for building that wall?" This is because you need a permit to build anything over 6 feet tall. Son didn't say anything, but he said he'll ask his mom. Mom comes out wondering what the heck is going on, and my dad politely asked, "What's up with the wall?" Mom says it's fine and dandy until my dad asks Mom if they have a permit for the wall. She says they don't need one. Politely, my dad tells the mom that they need to get a permit for it. Of course, he said he's willing to wait until they get a permit and that this is just a small warning, and he goes on his merry way. He clarifies he only asked if they had a permit. He didn't say anything about what happens if they didn't get a permit and the HOA engineers found out. A month passes and he's back, this time with a recorder. He again asks if they have a permit for the wall, and Mom immediately snaps at him. Obviously, they don't have a permit yet. She cusses at him, screaming for him to get out or she'll sue him for invading the house and her privacy. Well, what can you do but get out if a Karen starts complaining at you? Anyway, my dad reconsults the lawyer and the HOA engineers to make sure that all the information he's got is correct. Oh, and the lawyer told him that swearing or cursing someone can be taken against you, hence the recorder. And he goes back to the neighbor's house 2 weeks later with an HOA engineer. This conversation I heard from inside the house. My dad, speaking normally, couldn't hear, probably asking if they had a permit again. And the mom, "Of course not, we don't need one," as in legit screaming at the top of her lungs. Dad replies, "Then you wouldn't mind if the HOA engineer inspects that wall of yours?" And I was like, oh crap, and me and my mom were giggling inside the house. The HOA engineer confirmed that this was an over 6-foot wall that they were building and that they didn't have a permit. I guess the neighbor thought it was cheaper to knock it down, pay a fine, and have it rebuilt rather than pay the hefty fine. We could hear the wall getting torn down a few weeks later. Or, of course, the HOA engineer said it was the only thing they could do. Oh, the recorder? He didn't even use it anymore. The stupid reconstruction of the wall was enough music for him. Your dad is sick and then he died? Well, you're responsible for the late fee, posted by ProJazz TV Trumpets. To begin, my dad had a trust set up so that if something happens to him or he died, then a trustee can handle his affairs and probate court could be avoided for his stuff after death. However, a trust only grants those permissions once certain criteria are met, such as being incapacitated and of course death. My dad got sick in December, was mentally not there after waking up from an induced coma, and never mentally recovered. During most of this, I was able to handle the basic bills with his debit card and Social Security deposits, but I could not access his savings account where he kept money for things like home and car insurance annual dues and HOA annual dues. Not wanting to rush anything, I did not petition the doctors for a certificate of incapacitation until February. That part was easy. The docs were signed off on almost immediately upon asking. That gave me the ability to contact the attorney who made the trust and activate my power of attorney, guardianship, and accept my role as successor trustee. This obviously gave me access to accounts. It took about 2 weeks for the attorney to record everything with the county, but Dad got sicker in March with an infection he could not fight and was given weeks to live. He passed in April. When you're told that your dad, a man that you love unconditionally, is going to die soon, you put things on hold and spend time with that person, like every waking moment. And I know that the power, the gas, and the water isn't going to get shut off immediately if I'm a few days late. I know the mortgage has a grace period. The car insurance company, read that again, an insurance company, even worked with me on the delayed annual payment and put his account into a monthly status with a payment that reflected the same discount given to people who pay the full year up front. The HOA, however, dues were due in April. I got access to his funds in March, and then I got the news. His neighbors loved my dad. His house was the neighborhood party house. The entire HOA board hung out there. And the HOA, for the most part, is laid back on rules. I told the treasurer that I wasn't paying a dime until he died, And he said, no worries, and he'll waive the late fee because I shouldn't be worrying about bills at a time like that. The HOA president, however, at his deathbed, asked me when I was paying. I said, well, I'll worry about that later. She asked if I didn't have the money personally. Stupidly, I said, I have the money, but I'm spending time with my dad. I'm the only familiar face that he knows right now. Dad passed, and we had the funeral, and I went home for 2 weeks to decompress before managing his affairs and whatnot. I came back to 3 invoices in his mailbox. The first one was just the annual dues, but the next one had a 10% late fee, and the one after that had a 20% late fee in addition to the 10% late fee. I called the treasurer, and he said he was overruled by the president. I called the entire board, and, surprise, the president didn't call back. The board agreed and tried to press her, but she would not budge. During all of this, they added another 10% through the property management company who sends the invoice bypassing the treasurer. The reasoning? There was a responsible agent prior to the due date who could have paid this. I talked to the attorney who very plainly said that the HOA past due fees are magnitudes less than it would cost to fight them. So I freaking paid it with a letter addressed to the board that said, all HOA board members invited to the house for dinner after sale, but before closing, except the HOA president. I had an estate sale and I kicked her out, loudly, by saying, well, look who is here, the lion, the witch, and the audacity of this bee, when she came to look at his stuff. She specifically requested a paperweight that he kept on his desk that had no meaning to anyone but her. When it didn't sell in the estate sale, I listed it on the neighborhood app for $1. Then said it would cost the amount of the late fee when she inquired, took the ad down, and I took it home when she declined to pay almost $500 for it, and it's on my desk now. So yeah, screw HOAs and the jerks that run them. Couldn't have any respect, dignity, or civility over a late fee while someone is dying. Said it before and I'll say it again, money and power corrupts people, and this is absolutely no dignity at a time when you need that dignity the most. Come on, HOA president, you really dropped the ball on this one. A Karen HOA story called Entitled Neighbor from Heck, posted by Gertrude Secret. This is the story of my entitled neighbor, Bob. We live in an HOA, I know, and Bob lives across the green space from us. Bob's entitlement was evident almost from the moment that we moved in. About a month after we moved in, the police, the sheriff, and the DEA came knocking at our door. Bob had called them and told them that we had lawn bags full of cannabis in our garage. It's important to note here that I use medical cannabis. Bob runs the local Narcotics Anonymous group. Well, I gave the cops the grand tour of our home, and there was nothing here at all. They apologized for the intrusion and left. A week later, our landlord called because Bob had called him, saying that we had a grow-op going on here. Our landlord knew he was lying because the landlord had just been here. Bob was trying to get us out of the neighborhood because he can't have that crap in his neighborhood. He gave up on that when my daughter and her husband purchased the property. Then he started with the constant complaints and demands. We weren't allowed to feed the squirrels because it made a mess. We couldn't plant clover because it might get in his yard. We had to mow more frequently because he mows twice a week. We only mowed once and it looked bad. The list goes on and on. He mows the green space between our houses every time he mows his lawn, killing all the wildflowers, and then he tells people that they can't walk there because he mows it so it's his. The worst of his entitled behavior started 2 years ago. He decided he was going to stop using his furnace and burn wood instead. Now, I have lung cancer and my next door neighbor has COPD, so this was really bad. In January 2022, we had a stagnant air warning, which means you can only use wood stoves or fireplaces if that's your only source of heat. Bob didn't care, and the thick smoke from his wood stove blanketed the neighborhood. One morning, I woke up unable to breathe. My daughter called for an ambulance, and I stopped breathing and had to be intubated. I spent 6 days in a medically induced coma and another week in the hospital. My kids tried talking to him, and I tried reasoning with him, but he didn't care. He said he was allowed to heat his house any way he saw fit. We called the county, and they told him his wood stove was outdated and needed to be replaced. He said he would replace it, but 2 years later, it still has not happened. The final straw for me was when another neighbor and I had an argument. It was all of 2 minutes and resolved the next day. He came over screaming at me because he was not putting up with this crap in his neighborhood. Then he screamed at me that it was not fair that I got disability for cancer and he had to work all day. A month later, he was suddenly in too much pain to work. He went on disability from his job, spending his time climbing on his roof, working on his motorcycles, mowing his yard every other day, and generally just enjoying not having to work. Someone he worked with turned him in for fraud, and we had investigators out here taking pictures of his activities around the house. I made sure to have a chat with them myself. HOA story time. I was having a great day, that is, until HOA Karen decided to rear her ugly head. Seriously, I have to tell you what happened. So my wife and kids and I, we'd always loved our house and our lawn. It was nestled in the heart of a friendly suburban neighborhood. It was a huge upgrade from our last place, and we were in love with it. But there was one dark cloud that loomed over our American dream white picket fence life. The Homeowners Association and its notorious member, HOA Karen. Just think of the ugliest witch that you saw this past Halloween. Yeah, that's only like a quarter as ugly as this Karen. She's so awful, she makes the Grinch jealous. But yeah, we'd heard tales of her petty squabbles and the havoc that she'd end up wreaking on the neighbors, but nothing prepared us for the ordeal that was about to unfold. So it all started with our house, right? Ours was beautiful, slightly larger than the rest, with a charming white picket fence and a well-landscaped front yard. It wasn't ridiculously huge, just a bit more spacious, and Karen couldn't seem to handle us being so happy. She'd often peer out of her living room window, glaring at us as we spent time in our yard. It was kind of unsettling, but we tried our best to ignore her, because what else are you going to do? Well, come to find out, I spoke too soon. One day, as we were enjoying a family barbecue in our backyard, which is grilling steaks, I'm a dad, it's what we do, medium is the best way, right? We saw Karen venture past our property line, into our yard, as if marking her territory like a strange mutt with an ego, so far from home, trying to be the king of the castle or the neighborhood. I approached her and politely asked her to just respect our boundaries, but she brushed me off, claiming she had a right to keep an eye on us. What a creep. Well, things took a terrifying turn one night. We were in our living room, watching a movie, when a loud crash shattered our peace and quiet. We were startled, and we just rushed to the front of the house to find a brick had been hurled through our window, shards of our glass just covering the floor. My family was shaken, and anger coursed through my veins. I knew deep down that Karen was responsible, but we couldn't prove it. Determined to catch her in the act, we installed security cameras and replaced the window. We even decided to get a new mailbox, and I just couldn't help but taunt her a little bit. I hope you don't think I'm too rude, but I have to tell you what I did to her. So I told her, Karen, we just love this new mailbox. It's so sturdy and secure, and doesn't it look nice in front of our happy little home? I mentioned it to her during one of our rare encounters, and we watched as her eyes flashed with irritation before she turned away. Sure enough, the very next day, we heard a loud banging outside. Rushing to the window, we found Karen attempting to break our new mailbox with a baseball bat. But what she didn't know was that we had reinforced it with rebar. The sucker took the bait, hook, line, and sinker. The loud clang was followed by her painful scream, and we had it all on video. With clear evidence in hand, we took the matter to the HOA president and consulted our lawyer. The video left no room for doubt. Karen was caught red-handed. The case went to a hearing, and Karen was found guilty. The HOA imposed heavy fines on her, and she was ordered to repair the window and the mailbox that she had damaged. We'd also received restitution for the damages inflicted on our home. Our once pleasant suburban life began to regain its tranquility as Karen was forced to back down. It was a hard-fought battle, but we were able to put an end to the HOA Karen's reign of terror. With her financial penalties and mandatory repairs, Karen was humbled, and we never heard from her again. Our neighborhood, once shadowed by the specter of an overbearing HOA member, was free to flourish as a close-knit community. We celebrated our victory, cherishing our newfound peace and the safety of our family. Aunt shows up at my house with all her stuff, tells me she's going to be living with me for a while. So, without getting too political, we recently had an election in the USA. My aunt supported one side, while her husband and adult offspring supported the other side. The election did not go the way that my aunt wanted it to. Aunt proceeded to flip her crap, breaking things and yelling, even going as far as to set her daughter's "I voted" sticker on fire. Her husband called the cops. The cops declined to arrest her for anything, but suggested that she find a different place to stay for the night. This happened yesterday in New Jersey. Fast forward to 2 a.m. today. Here I am, sleeping peacefully in my home with my family over 500 miles from all of that drama. My fence alarm goes off, waking me up. I don't know if it's a bear or a trespasser, so I get my pants on and grab my shotgun just to be safe. Turns out my aunt had cut the lock off of my front gate because she couldn't get in and I wasn't answering my phone. Why does she have bolt cutters in her car? So I safely stow my weapon and ask her what the heck. She starts crying and screaming, mind you, this is at 2 a.m. in a quiet rural community, about how the devil took her family and how they threw her out. And she says that since she has nowhere else to go, I need to let her in so she can stay in my guest room for a while. I told her one of my guilties is using that room right now, and the room is occupied. This person came from Texas all the way to West Virginia to hang out with me. I'm not going to toss them out with 30 seconds of notice because my aunt showed up. So she decides to call the police and tell them that I'm keeping her from entering her home. We're out in the woods, so the cops don't get here quick. 4:41 a.m. The cops show up. I see them talking to her in my driveway. She shows them the bolt cutters and the ruined lock, and a few minutes later, the officer knocks on my door. Your tenant claims that. I immediately cut him off and tell him that I do not have a tenant. I own and occupy this structure, and I offer to show him the deed. Well, this woman claims, and I cut him off again. What's the address on her ID say? I reply. At this point, the cop is ticked at me, I can tell. So I try to de-escalate the situation. Look, man, she doesn't live here. She has never lived here. That's my aunt. She lives in New Jersey. Please check her ID card. The cop calms down a bit and lets me know that he will talk to her and then comes back. Around 10 minutes later, the cops come back to my door. 3 of them this time, not just the one from earlier. One of them had stripes and a rocker on his arm, so I could tell he was important. He asked me if there's any way Aunt can stay here for the night because she's too drunk to drive, so he can't let her back on the road. This woman just drove from New Jersey to West Virginia drunk. Thank God she didn't kill anyone. I told him that she cannot stay here, but that I'm sure there's room in the local jail. The cop asked me if she can just sleep in her car in my driveway and then leave in the morning. I told him absolutely not. When she wakes up in the morning, I would just have to call them to come get her off my property. So that would solve nothing. I asked them to remove her from my property. Long story short, her car got towed and she is in the drunk tank, no charges pending for the night. So much for sleeping tonight. My kids need to be up for school soon. I mean, what would you do if this happened to you? How would you handle it? Malicious compliance cost company hundreds of millions and their most profitable product. So this is a story from someone I know. I've known this person for years, and while I don't work with them, I've seen this story play out more or less step by step. I know several people involved, but I'm going to tell it from the point of view of the person that I know best. So, many years ago, this person, let's just refer to them as person got a really great job working for a Fortune 500 company. Not going to give any more specifics, but the company offered many benefits for their employees. They treated their employees like people and not like numbers. They offered a yearly raise to anyone who worked there. This was meant to do several things. First of all, it was meant to keep up with inflation so that employees wouldn't have to stress about money. I'm sure a lot of you know the struggle, waiting for minimum wage to be updated so you can start saving money to hold over till the next wage increase. No, the company was ahead of the curve. On top of that, when they did start hiring new employees for more, they increased the wage of anyone with that specific position by the same amount to keep the older employees from earning less than newer employees. They offered many other benefits as well. Basically, an awesome place to work for. Unfortunately, it's a small town, and the company wanted to expand that specific branch of operations. They couldn't do it here, so they chose to move out. They sold the branch office building along with the product that person worked to another smaller company. When it was sold, then person went with it. The old company made the new company sign a contract which guaranteed that the yearly bonus would stay around along with several other similar benefits. New company wasn't around very long, and they ended up expanding as well. They did the same thing, sold the location and the product to another company. Unfortunately, they didn't care as much about their employees and only treated them well because of contractual obligations. So, when they sold the location and product, it didn't come with a contract. New company did care a little bit about the employees, but ended raises and all of that. They would listen to employee complaints. That was about it. They weren't around long either before the scummiest company came in and bought them out. So, new company comes in and buys them out and immediately starts changing policies and shifting everything up to make everyone's jobs harder. Person and their team members got used to it and kept going. Now, here's the thing about Person. Person works on a team of specialists. There are only about 12 people on the team and a manager that's over them. Well, there was. I'll get to that. This team doesn't require any special education or anything, but it does require a several-week training course and several months of acclimation. The product is extremely delicate, and the customers for this product are extremely demanding. They, more or less, require perfection, anything short and no money. You must watch every single word that you say to these customers, or they might write you off permanently. However, this is an extremely valuable product, and the company makes a lot of money from it. Or they did, at least. Let's speed forward about 10 or 15 years. The company has only found new ways to treat their employees less like humans since they took it over and are somehow getting away with it. Turnover is high, but as long as they have high school grads looking for a job, then they can keep their building full. Unfortunately, Person and their team have asked for a raise several times at this point, and they were always being turned down because they are earning at market value for their position. I looked it up, and market value is determined by a simple equation that takes into account other people in your profession at your experience level and with your job title within about 100 miles, and then it calculates an average wage for them. Considering the extreme specialty of this position and being located in a remote region, market value is determined by calculating the average wage of everyone on Person's team. Basically, the company was saying, "Shut up, we aren't giving you a raise." Now, something to understand, Person and their team members weren't that disappointed not to get a raise every year. However, they were now making only a little more than a new hire with the company. And there are other companies that do similar but less specialized work in the area, but start people out with a higher wage than Person is making at this point. I literally knew high school grads with zero work experience that made more than Person did. Now, at this point, Person has about 20 plus years of experience working this specific product, and the least experienced person on the team had been working it for 12 plus years. The straw that broke the camel's back was an annual investors meeting that was streamed live to the entire company. Person working on a small team was invited to take a few hours off to watch the meeting. It was kind of a reward for them for performing so well. The company shot themselves in the foot with this one though, and it was already starting to go south anyways. They just sped it up a little. So to put this into perspective for you guys, the company's total profit for that year, that's profit not earnings, was a little over $1.2 billion. Out of that $1.2 billion, Person's team of 12 people, in a company hiring tens of thousands mind you, these 12 people and their manager brought in about $480 million. That's a little over a third of the company's total profits for the entire year. For those that don't like math, that's about $40 million per person of pure profit. Person specifically earned a little over $60 million alone. The lowest earner on the team was over $20 million. Seeing that they were single-handedly responsible for over a third of the company's total profit for the year, the entire team got together and demanded a raise. The manager actually put that in before they even said anything. Even their manager thought it was wrong. They demanded $20 an hour. They actually only wanted half of that, but since they were being lowballed and completely underappreciated by the company for the work that they did, they put in a higher number. By the way, $10 is about the amount that they would have been making with their yearly bonus had it never been discontinued. As you might expect, the company, being money hungry, came back with the same response as usual. They didn't even try to negotiate. They asked several more times over the course of a few weeks, threatening to quit if they didn't get a raise, and the company basically just said, go on, anyone can do your job. Cue malicious compliance. They didn't all quit. Only 3 of the 12, which, if you've been keeping up, would add up to, on average, $120 million over 1 year. But that's not all. Actually, what they did ended up turning out even worse for the company. The rest of the team all agreed to only work their minimum requirements. The company had minimum requirements that everyone had to meet. This team, up to this point, being proud of the work they put in consistently, exceeded the requirements many times over. They would compete to see who could perform the best. The lowest earner on this team often exceeded minimum requirements by 3 times over. At the end of the year, the company had to painfully explain to investors why their highest earning department was now performing at less than half what it did the previous year. They came up with some stupid explanations. They still refused to give a raise though. Instead, what they decided to do was raise their minimum requirements. At first, the team kept up, but eventually, out of aggravation, when their constant requests for a raise were denied, about half the team requested transfer off. They were transferred to other departments and replaced with brand new employees, the most experienced of which had been with this company for about a year. These new employees struggled to keep up with the minimum requirements, which kept getting raised to meet stockholder expectations. Eventually, original members on the team had either quit or transferred to another department, even the manager. This left the team with only new employees who had absolutely no idea what they were doing. They completely alienated the vast majority of their former customers almost overnight. And if that wasn't enough, because they could not meet the extremely high demands of the company, which were still only a fraction of what the original team were performing, they were either let go or transferred to another department and replaced after only a few months on the team. Even hiring several times the number of employees on that team did nothing. When they reported an earnings of $80 million from that team, the company got so fed up with it that they just sold the product to another company for an enormous loss. Unfortunately, this isn't one of those "the company drove themselves out of business" stories, but I still think it's pretty funny and I like to tell it to all my new friends. I also use it to warn anyone who might be considering going to this company to work. Honestly, you'd think that if someone earns that much profit for your company, you'd at least try to keep them around. Want me to punch in on the work clock? Fine, now deal with overtime pay. Posted by Disastrous Narwhal 926. I, a 31-year-old male, started working for my uncle 2 years ago. He has a company with some business partners of his, and my work is now being directly under him, learning every perk of running the business and also being a personal assistant to him. We settled on a contract in which I'd receive a fixed monthly amount with a bonus of additional salary by the end of every year, and while I had no overtime pay, I had total control of my work schedule. And by total, I meant total, where I could come to the job just 3 days a week as long as I delivered results. My uncle knew my work ethic, so it's kind of a win for him since when needed, I'd work 60 and 65 hours a week. If needed to, I could also work during a holiday. We have around 10 or 12 festivity days that are non-working days. If I were to put it into an American perspective, it's just as if we had over like 10 4th of July holidays during the year. Also, I was available on call nearly 24/7 if anyone needed anything from me related to work. Work was running great until September last year, when my uncle took a couple days to travel to another state to meet new clients, and one of his associates, let's call him Gordon, took his role in the company for those days to support some of the roles. Due to having worked a 14-hour shift the day before the travel, and also having two 12-hour shifts the week before, I was dead tired. And well, since we had little to no work piled up, I took early leave the first day he was there and arrived way after lunch the day after, then started working normally from the third day until he came back a week later. He was furious at my attitude, berating my uncle for even contracting me in the first place, since I don't even work full regular hours, and demand among the other business partners, the company has in total 6 owners, including my uncle, that I at least punch in my working hours, and if I don't meet the quota, those would be deducted from my monthly payment. There's a ton of labor laws where I live. Employees have a certain amount of hours required to work each month, every hour short of that is deducted from the monthly payment, and every hour beyond is paid as overtime. Other partners backed up Gordon's claim, stating that I needed more supervision on what I was doing, which my uncle was forced to comply, and his only remark was, since we're doing it by law, it means we'll also have to pay him overtime according to the law, right? They all agreed. And from October forward, I would start punching my hours on the job every day. Cue malicious compliance. That was exactly what I did. Gordon was expecting a decrease on my pay due to being in the company at least my busy week since I arrived, when in fact I usually pull a crapload of overtime. Also, if they need to call me after I left, they have to punch in the hours from the moment I left until I finish the call, resulting in free overtime pay. One more thing. By the law, the rate of overtime pay increases the more overtime is done in a month. It's a really weird formula, but to simplify it, my average overtime hours pays 1/3 higher than the average overtime hours of other employees that have the same monthly salary as me. My monthly income is now 30% higher due to the overtime I started receiving, and in a busy month, that could get even close to 50% higher, even though I'm actually working a little less than before. And Gordon can't go back in the same situation as before, since my uncle made sure that once I started punching my hours, there was no going back, and all the partners approved it. Just ship the equipment to me, posted by BMACPL4442. A couple of years ago, I took a fantastic job as an IT manager in a remote role for a healthcare company. It was the best job I'd ever had. Best salary, total freedom, and a wonderful boss who trusted me to do my job. I was brought on to create an internal IT team, and we'd all been outsourced IT, for a company that had 19 offices in 3 US states, and I was given free rein to create the team as I saw fit. I hired a great sysadmin for both our California and Missouri markets, and I served that role for Alabama. The employees loved us. Most tickets were resolved in an hour or two instead of the outsourced company taking a day or two, and maybe not fixing the issue still. We were saving the company close to $500,000 per year in outsourced cost versus our salaries. Now, the figure does include savings on licensing that the outsourced company never cared to audit. It was glorious. But my boss decided to become a stay-at-home dad. I was looking to advance to his position, but our new CEO instead created a new VP of IT position for a guy that she had worked with for 7 previous years. Sadly, the new guy was the micromanager of micromanagers. He had my company credit card closed. I went from a discretionary limit of $10,000 to having to ask his approval on $10 network cables. He put himself on every account, removed most of my authority, and in effect, I was demoted to senior sysadmin. One day, I visited one of our sites and picked up a bunch of stuff. 5 desktop PCs, we had moved to laptops only, a carton full of keyboards, mice, and cables, weird odds and ends. The idea was that I would take it to one of our other facilities and store it there, save the desktop PCs that I would ship to our outsource partner. Well, I went on vacation, only to come home to discover that the previous Friday had been my last day. I was getting 2 weeks severance and they were eliminating the department entirely. I asked the VP about the equipment and he told me to ship it all to him and he'd dispense of it. Now, I assumed that he'd want me to ship it to the outsource company, or at least to do so with the PCs. But no. The thing is, the VP lives in Colorado. We have no branches there. The outsource partner is in Missouri, meaning that no matter what, he'd at least be reshipping those PCs to Missouri. Oh well. Well, I went to FedEx and I carted all the crap in. They offered me various methods, but I told them that it was all going on the company's account to ship it ground per VP, but to do so in whatever method made them the most money. Friends, they spent well over 3 hours carefully wrapping and padding all of that crap. They charged the company several $100s. By my best estimate from previous shipping I'd done with them, it was about triple what it should have been. And of course, VP also had to pay to ship those desktops again. But hey, he told me to do it. Company held my severance until they got the equipment, so I guess that satisfied their requirements. Also, screw that guy. He's a thief and I know it, and I even turned him in, but the company did nothing. Pay for 20 hours of work? Get 20 hours of work. Posted by Renical. This happened last year and I've been waiting months to share the inevitable fallout, so please enjoy this lengthy tale of corporate stupidity. I'll begin by saying that I work for a software company. I was working on a project for a client to customize part of the software and stuff, and the project was very open-ended, mostly because the client kept changing their mind about what they wanted. So the contract was time and materials, meaning that I had an hourly rate, so I would log all the time worked on the project in half-hour intervals, and every week my company would bill the client company for the hours spent on the project. The client said that they didn't care how much effort it took, they wanted a good product and they wanted it before the end of the year so they could present it at their big internal meeting. At the beginning, the project went great. Every week I had a meeting with the client and I would get feedback on the progress as well as any new requests they might have, and then I'd spend however long it took to implement the changes. I'd bill them 15 hours, 20 hours, 25 hours, or however many it had been. Slowly, over time, the client started requesting more and more. I told them during the meeting, this feature will require X days of work, and changing that will require Y more days, and so on. But again, the client insisted that they needed all those extra features. They also complained that the project wasn't advancing quickly enough, and insisted they needed the project completed before the end of the year. I talked to my manager and explained the situation. To be able to finish quickly enough, I needed to work full time on this project. My manager moved my other projects to different people, and we told the client that until the end of the year, I would work full time on the project to ensure that we will hit all the deadlines. The client was overjoyed for about a month. The following month, the client is ticked and is demanding to know why we're charging them so much. I pull out my timesheets and explain that, as agreed, I've been working full-time and more on their project. Every week, I've logged between 45 and 50 hours of work, and I have detailed notes specifying exactly how I've spent that time. I'm not particularly concerned about being accused of stealing time because I'm a fast worker and most tasks have been completed more quickly than the original estimates. Besides, I point out that now I'm working twice as many hours as before, so it's costing the client twice as much per week. But I'm also completing tasks twice as quickly and will be finished in half the time. The client, unfortunately, doesn't appreciate my use of logical reasoning. They accuse my company of taking advantage, and they say that starting from next week, they no longer want to pay for more than 20 hours of work per week. I tell them, sure, we can do that, but it's October already and you want the project completed by the end of the year. Given the amount of work still left to do, I will need more hours to finish. The client doesn't let me explain and says that we're not to bill them for anything more than 20 hours per week. They will not pay us for more than 20 hours per week, and they want this in writing or they'll cancel the entire project. And my manager says, of course, the customer is always right. Now this was an evil, evil act of malicious compliance, so please read or listen until the end before getting angry at my manager. He's a great guy. So my manager sends the client an email confirming that, starting from date, my engagement with them will be capped at a maximum of 20 hours per week. He also attaches a spreadsheet of the estimated time to develop all the new features of the project, how many hours I'd spent so far, and how many hours I projected to spend to complete it. The client smugly acknowledges this. Before the end of the week, my manager gives me back my other project as well as a new one. You see, at the time, we were understaffed because we were growing too quickly, and we were getting more requests for new projects than we could handle. So, there would have been no point in stealing hours from this client and ticking them off, when we can take on a couple of new clients instead and bill everyone for the actual work and keep everyone happy. So, starting from next week, my new schedule is 20 hours with whiny client, 10 hours with client B, and 15 hours with client C. It works great for me. It doesn't work that great for whiny client. At our next weekly meeting, one of the features they requested isn't ready yet. At the following meeting, I tell them that we'll need to move the deadline for the next milestone by 2 weeks. Then, it's the beginning of December, and they ask me if I would be able to make some last-minute changes and still deliver the project by the end of the year. And I say, oh, there is no way the project can be finished by the end of the year. We have yet another meeting with the client and my manager. My manager asks me why I'm missing this huge deadline. I say, hey, do you remember when I was talking about all that work that still needed to be done and how long it would take? In October, we estimated that the project needed another 60 days of work, and I worked 10 days in October and 10 days in November because you said the 20 hours max per week. It's going to take about 40 more days of work to finish the project, and it's December. Even if I work overtime, there are not 40 days left before the end of the year. Manager is like, yep, makes perfect sense. Client does the shocked Pikachu face. They act like this is the first they've heard about not being able to meet the deadlines, even though I've been telling them for weeks. Unfortunately, they are the kind of person who never listens to what they don't want to hear. At first, they wanted the work done quickly, so they didn't think that if I worked more hours, that I would bill them for more hours. Then, they wanted to be billed for fewer hours, so they didn't consider that I would work fewer hours on the project and things would get done much more slowly. Unfortunately for the client, who would like to pretend that we were springing this on them at the last minute, we had tons of emails to show we had told them well in advance. My manager's email back in October had even included an estimate of when the project would be completed based on the number of hours worked per week. Our butt was well and truly covered. Now, as for the fallback, the client kicked and screamed and demanded that I go back to work on their project full-time, or even that my company should provide a second person to help me meet the deadline at the end of the year. It's January and the project is still unfinished, so you can guess how well that went. Client had to move the big presentation of the new software and was not happy about it, and about having to explain it all to their own CEO. But hey, we told them very nicely in corporate tones to pound sand. I was already scheduled to work on 2 other projects for the next few months, and it had been hard enough to put me full-time on this project the first time. My manager is not going to leave another 2 clients hanging, especially not to please whiny client who keeps changing their mind and threatens to cancel their contract every other week. As a company, we do our best to keep the client happy, but there's a limit to everything, especially when someone goes out of their way to not listen when we try to explain how cause and effect works. An update. Thanks for the awards and kind comments. They're cheering me up as whiny client has just received the total hours I worked in January and takes issue with how long each task is taking. Because, of course. To clarify a mistaken assumption I've seen, both me and whiny client are women. Unfortunately, she is our only point of contact with the client company. I'm hoping she'll not renew the contract, but I'm afraid that she needs us and our sales team wants the money. The new contract is being negotiated right now, and hopefully it'll have conditions that prevent this repeat of a crap show. Can you be forced into an HOA and made to follow their rules? About 15 years ago, my brother bought a farm in Ontario, Canada, near a medium-sized city. In the last 5 years or so, an upper middle class subdivision popped up beside of him, which for the most part wasn't much of a problem. Today, he had the president of the HOA for the subdivision come over to him and tried to issue him demands and fines for violating their rules. His farm was originally established in the late 1800s and the subdivision was built around 2010, so it's not like he was part of them when they were built. The HOA is saying that he is creating a public nuisance by spreading manure on his fields. He rents most of them out to a neighbor since he works in the city for the most part. along with demanding that he stop doing things like using his smoker, using farm equipment near the subdivision, cease commercial enterprises, and stop using his impact gun because the noise and smoke is apparently very disruptive to the community a kilometer or so away. The president of the HOA also demanded a ridiculous amount in past dues, along with other fines that he needs to supposedly pay to the president and not the HOA. My brother took the papers and told the guy in no kind words to never come back with papers demanding money unless he was with a lawyer or a cop that'll back him up on his bullcrap. He also has an appointment with a lawyer Thursday to talk about this, but in the meantime, I just wanted to know if there was anything my brother should do to prepare for his meeting with the lawyer. The only issue I think he might have is that he has guard donkeys protecting his wife's sheep. She loves knitting and creating things with the wool, so he has some of the meanest donkeys I've ever seen guarding them from coyotes. Some of the kids from the subdivision come around to look at the sheep, but he has a lot of signs warning about the dangers of the donkeys. Realistically, he can't secure a kilometer or so of fence fully against children, so should he be worried? He has chicken wires stapled up along the fence so no little kids can easily crawl through, and there's signs to warn the older ones that the donkeys are not to be trifled with. Is there anything he should be doing or working on to help himself out? We both think the president of the HOA is talking out of his butt, but I'm slightly worried that if a kid gets bitten or trampled by a donkey, that he will be in trouble, and the president of the HOA could use that against him. What should my brother do aside from document to help himself against the HOA president and to make sure that no little kids get hurt by the donkeys? Is he going about this right, or is there something else that he should do to legally help himself? Do you agree with this answer? If your brother owns the land and did not incorporate his property into the HOA, then the HOA can do nothing about his farm. He should have his lawyer write a cease and desist letter to stop the harassment about the HOA. He should also talk to the lawyer about the farm animals potentially being an attractive nuisance. I don't imagine on a farm that animals would be, though, and what the appropriate signage he'd need, such as beware of donkey and no trespassing. The president of the HOA and the parents of the injured child would be two completely different parties, unless it's the president's child, so the HOA can't do anything about that. The lawyer is his best bet. Explain the situation clearly, bring the land deed and a survey if he has it, and deliver a timeline of events. An update. As it turns out, my brother already had his property surveyed when he was working with a neighbor to rent out some of the fields, and from what he says, there's a 0% chance that anyone from the subdivision actually owns any of his land. He debated getting another survey done, but he was pretty sure that the letter from the lawyer would be enough. The lawyer seemed pretty helpful, and my brother sounded really happy with how the meeting went. Apparently, it didn't look to the lawyer like he was doing anything that couldn't be seen as normal farm practices, so he shouldn't worry about being sued for the spreading of the manure. The donkeys and the sheep were discussed, but they ended up deciding that he would just increase his insurance, add more warning signs, and fully wrap the wooden fence with new sheep fence, along with replacing the older fencing. He also got a letter that, from what he read to me, seems to cover the fact that he isn't doing anything that could be considered unusual farming practices. It also showed that he actually owns the land and said that, unless the HOA has a dissenting survey, they have no claim to his land. It ended up saying that the HOA president should contact the lawyer and not my brother if he has any further issues. Interestingly enough, the lawyer couldn't find any homeowners association under the name the guy had given my brother. He said it's possible they just formed or changed their name, but more than likely it's just some busybody sticking his nose where it doesn't belong. There's a small chance that they unofficially formed an HOA and never actually did anything but give themselves a name and some rules. But the lawyer said that if they did, it wouldn't change the fact that they can't force him to join. So my brother and his wife are happy that things seem to have been resolved. He bought a security camera for the front door so that he can have a recording if the guy shows up again, but that's hopefully the end of it. Now, I'm no lawyer, but if you don't know about a situation like this and things can go wrong, it's best to get somebody that knows what the heck they're talking about. HOA mistakes me for my cousin's wife, posted by Deleted. Back when I was 18, I'm 26-year-old female now, I was helping my cousin, 30 male, and his newlywed wife, 25 female, move into their new home that has an HOA. I was carrying boxes into the house, and I was just covered in sweat. As I was enjoying some rest with a bottle of water, one of the HOA members came up to me to introduce himself. We exchanged pleasantries and then asked, "How long have you and your husband been married?" After that, I told him to please wait and brought in the actual married couple to meet the HOA member. They came out and the man's face dropped. Then he faked a phone call from the HOA and left. We didn't know anything was wrong at the time. Not even a week after they moved in, I get a call on my cell phone from my cousin. He said that the police were raiding his house for possible drugs. I know my cousin. He has a criminal record of a Boy Scout. Every time he gets a prescription for painkillers, he either shreds the note or dumps the pills in the toilet due to fear of addiction. The police found nothing and left, and they did apologize. The very next day, his wife was stopped by the police in her own driveway. They said that she was suspected for prostitution, even though she was wearing a pantsuit from her job as a cardiologist. They called her hospital to confirm her whereabouts, and she was let go. The police came back the day after that after someone claimed that his wife was breaking into their own home. How can someone break into their home through the front door and with their own keys? After a month, the HOA came up to them claiming that they are a nuisance and attempted to put a lien on the house for so many calls to the police. Luckily, my cousin's brother is a lawyer and fought against the lien in court. At court, the HOA member that met the couple on day one was revealed to be the one that sent the cops after them so they can be kicked out of the neighborhood. As it turns out, that person testified that he didn't want their kind in his perfect neighborhood. Everyone in that room was dumbstruck. The HOA lawyer immediately dropped the case, apologized to my cousin and his wife. That HOA member was kicked out of the neighborhood for racism. As it turns out, he also called the police on every black and brown person that even passed by his house. Since then, they moved out of the neighborhood after she got a better job offer in her field. I forgot to say, she is black and my cousin is white. That's blatant racism, and the HOA member deserves the punishment that he received. My mother has forged my signature on checks and stolen $60,000, posted by Angel in Blue Jeans. I kind of don't know where to begin. Right now, I'm trying to figure out what kind of attorney I need. My mother has been forging my signature on checks addressed to me since I was 18. There have been 4 checks in the amount of $15,000 each, totaling to $60,000. The money I get is from a lawsuit from when I was a minor, but I had no idea about any of it because I was really young when it happened. I have since reported her to the insurance company's fraud department, my local police, I live in Illinois, she lives in California, my bank, as well as USPS, since she has been stealing and opening my mail to get these checks. I decided to send her and my dad an email outlining everything I know with the proof, which is the forged check and the bank statements, and she texted me this morning denying all of it, but in the same breath said that I owed them that money because they raised me. I'm starting to ramble. She has since decided to just ignore me, so I'm going to look into an attorney. It seems like it's insanely expensive just to get a consultation, so I'm wondering which specialty of attorney I should be looking for. Is this a family matter, or does the $60,000 in fraud and mail theft make it a different specialty? Now, a lot of the story has been left out because I just assumed I'd need to find a lawyer. The injury occurred when I was 4 or 5, and I'm now 23. When the lawsuit happened, my mother was not even legally my mother yet, as I was later adopted by her. The checks started coming when I was 18. I didn't even know about the injury or lawsuit, let alone that I was owed money, so I had no idea that any checks were coming. I just found out about this very, very recently. I know the name of the company paying me out, but I don't even know the name of the establishment where I was hurt as a kid. I filed a police report in my state as the PD where she lives said it's technically out of their jurisdiction. I'm a bit confused because the crime was committed there, but they said that the crime has to be reported based off of where the victim is. I filed a fraud report with the insurance company who has been sending the checks to my mother's address. Everything has been updated to my address and information, and a passcode was put on the account that only I know. They are mailing me paperwork with copies of the forged checks as well as an affidavit I have to sign regarding the fraud. I made a report with my bank, and they were jerks and said there's nothing they can do and were extremely short with me. Finally, I made a report with UPS Investigation Department. While the checks were sent to my mother's address, where I lived as a kid, they still had my legal name on them, not hers. So she opened mail that wasn't addressed to her. Now, while the crime was committed in California and I live in Illinois, I believe the settlement was in Colorado. That's where I lived before I was adopted, and that's where the accident occurred. My aunt was the one who told me about the money and helped me find out who the insurance company was. My aunt, mom's sister, told me that when my now mom and dad adopted me, they had to submit paperwork to prove guardianship with the insurance company, and that's when the company changed the address from my childhood home in Colorado to their home in California. Even though my adopted mom committed the crimes, my adopted dad knew everything that was going on. They both profited off the money, and they did a huge backyard remodel. OP updates with, I'm not being nonchalant, I'm just more in shock. My mom is middle and high and lower high class. I'm quite literally dirt poor and pregnant. I'm adopted, so I know that she's never really viewed me as her own. It just seems unreal to me that she could steal $60K from me and then talk crap about me to my family because I couldn't afford prenatals around my birthday. Boyfriend of 5 years cheated on me, so I ruined his RuneScape account. I used to play RuneScape, so this is going to be really fun. My boyfriend and I had met online well over 6 years ago through an online game by the name of RuneScape. He was 14 and I was 17, but it had felt like we had been friends forever. We both played the game very often and connected through it, eventually leading us to start a long-distance relationship. Things began to escalate as the years went on, and we began seeing each other in person every few months or so. We were about 1,500 miles apart, so one of our main priorities for the future was moving in together and closing the distance. My job had prevented us from doing that, but we had finally set a date for me to move in with him in December of this year. Our relationship never had any serious issues, and I was more than happy to have him in my life as he was happy to have me. As I got older, I began to play RuneScape less and less as work took up most of my time. He continued to play regularly, if not more than he had when I first met him. He could never really hold down a job and barely had an income, but I supported him throughout the years and even paid his rent from across the country after he moved out of his parents' house a few years ago. I never really minded it because he was a sweetheart, but we began to have problems. In November of last year, I couldn't help pay his monthly rent. I was short on cash after having to pay my own living expenses alongside car repairs and bills that I owed to the state, and I just couldn't afford to support him at the time. When I called him one night to discuss it, he freaked out and started crying that he didn't want to live with his parents again. I tried calming him down and even suggesting that I could help him find a temporary job until I could start providing for him again, but he wasn't having it. He claimed his parents would abuse him if he returned home, which I know for a fact isn't true because him and his parents have stayed with me several times. They've given him the world. I eventually did calm him down, but he remained passive-aggressive this entire night, and we eventually hung up. Because I cared about him, I reached out to his father the next day and informed him that he would probably be moving back home after his lease expired that month. I explained how I wouldn't be able to afford paying for his living for a month or two, and if there were any local jobs he could work in order to, make an income. But apparently, a friend of his father needed help managing a small warehouse for his business and was looking to potentially hire my boyfriend for the season. It paid $15 an hour and was super easy, like lifting boxes, sweeping the floors, and taking inventory. I brought it up to my boyfriend that same night, and he was not having it. Not only did he not want to work in a crappy warehouse, but he didn't want to work at all. All he planned to do day in, day out was play RuneScape. I brought up a few other job listings I'd found in his area, and he immediately shot them all down as well. He then had the audacity to comment about how he thinks I should work harder and possibly work a second job. I kept my composure and simply argued against it until we eventually hung up. I collapsed on my bed and cried for a good hour or two afterwards because of the intense emotional stress I was under. Not only do I work 8 hours a day, 6 days a week, I'm also an industrial meteorologist. If I remember correctly, that's a lot more work than playing RuneScape every day and using my Hulu account. I really considered breaking up with him right that moment, but I changed my mind and decided to give him another chance. Looking back on it, big mistake. I messaged him throughout the night and we sort of made up, but I was still a little uneasy about the entire event. He had moved back with his parents by the time December had come, and I began to help him look for jobs while he wasted his life away playing video games. I eventually persuaded him to start working at a small retail store near his house, and he thankfully began to make some money. I would still buy him video games and transfer him money like normal because I spoiled him, and our relationship began to feel somewhat okay again. Last month, both him and I put our money together to fly him across the US to stay with me for 4 days. We hadn't seen each other in person since last summer, so we were both looking forward to it. He arrived and we had a great time for the first few days because he could actually take me on dates for once with his new income. Everything was perfect until I caught a glimpse of his phone's lock screen while he was taking a shower. "When are you gonna leave her?" the Discord message read. I could have ran into the bathroom and snapped his neck in that moment, but I kept myself together as best as I could without killing him. I had never felt so used and disrespected or hated in my entire life. When he came out of the bathroom, I gave him a fake smile, but I genuinely hated him from that moment on. He could have dropped dead on the floor, and I would have spit on him. I spent the remainder of the night watching him play RuneScape, and I remained very quiet. He took notice of this and asked me if everything was okay, and I lied and I told him I was fine. When it came time for him to go to sleep, I let that effort climb into bed with me, and he tried initiating stuff because it was our final night together. I rejected as politely as I could without tearing his member completely off. He was disappointed, but it went out like a light. Immediately after he went to sleep, I reached over and unplugged his phone and started digging through his messages with that girl. I feared that I had misinterpreted the message I had seen, but I was completely right after all. Not only had he been cheating on me, he had been doing so for nearly 6 months, leading me to believe that he hooked up with another girl directly after I couldn't pay for his living in November. I scrolled through probably 100,000 messages and wanted to vomit my insides out by the end of it. He had talked crap about me, claiming I was emotionally abusive, just as he had done with his parents, and even sent this girl my nudes so they could pick me apart physically. When morning came, I had slept in because of how late I was up reading his messages. I woke up to find him on my computer playing RuneScape and eating my food. It was like all of our relationship had been wiped from my mind, and he was now an evil stranger sitting in my house. I wanted to scream at him, and I wanted to tear him apart and kick him out of my house onto the street, but I didn't. In fact, I gave him as much love and attention as I could muster that morning because I wanted to leave things feeling like normal between us. I dropped him off at the airport and we had a quick and somber goodbye before I left him forever, unbeknownst to him. I drove back home as calmly as I could before crying my eyes out in a mix of complete anger and emotional pain. I ended up kicking my bed frame so hard that the wood split and I had to buy a new one recently. If only it were his face. I wanted to break his heart by the time he arrived back home, but I wanted it to really hurt. I logged into our joint RuneScape account that we had made several years ago, where him and I would work on training the same account and raising it almost like our baby. We'd always joked that if we were to ever split up, he would take half of the account's bank contents and I would take the rest. I took my half and transferred it to my main account before taking his half and giving it away to random people throughout the game. Every last bit of it. Even items I couldn't normally trade away, I used a spell to convert the items into coins, which I then gave away as well. The bank was now empty. It then occurred to me that I had the credentials to his main account, and they were written down on my desk, as he would frequently have me train his farming skill every so often. I didn't hesitate at all and logged into his precious 14-year-old RuneScape account. I immediately took all of the contents of his bank and sold it all on the Grand Exchange, which is a marketplace in the game. It took an extremely long time to clear out his bank, but he would still be flying home for another 4 hours, so I had plenty of time. By the time I had sold and destroyed everything, I had 4 stacks of coins totaling over 8.5 billion. Now, what to spend it on? I wanted to waste his life earnings on the most useless, stupid thing I could think of besides him. I logged back into my main account to reach out to a friend of mine that collects massive stacks of burnt food. For the unaware, burnt food in RuneScape has no use. You can't unburn them, eat them, or even sell them on the Grand Exchange. They are, however, tradable amongst players. I've always poked fun at this guy for collecting burnt food, but now I was more thankful than ever to make his acquaintance in my revenge. I asked him what the most obscure, unwanted item was of the burnt food variety, and he replied, burnt spider. Lo and behold, he had roughly 6,000 of the item, spider on shaft, burnt, in his bank that he was willing to sell me. Feeling generous with my ex-boyfriend's coins, I gave my friend the full stack of 2.147 billion coins and left a very happy customer. I dropped the 6,083 burnt spiders in his bank, but still had about 6 billion coins left to spend. With the remaining money, I decided to treat myself. I went onto the Grand Exchange and ended up going on a shopping spree. The first thing I bought were 100 bonds. If you're not familiar, a bond in RuneScape grants you 14 days of in-game membership. After trading all 100 bonds to my account, I now have almost 4 years of membership paid for me. I spent a majority of his coins on extremely nice armor and weapons, all of which went straight into my account. He still had about an extra billion, so I spent it on the supplies I needed to level up an expensive skill of mine. By the end of the afternoon, he was left with a measly 150,000 coins in his bank, all of which I gave away to a guy cooking pizzas outside of the exchange. Nothing was left, so I decided to pick up a pile of bones off the ground and leave it solely in his bank. It might sound petty, but I laughed for a while. Now, I know what you're thinking. This is so cruel. You've ruined the tens of thousands of hours he had put into a game. Well, it was time that he learned that I can be a witch, a mean witch. On top of spending every last coin he ever had made, I leveled his defense skill. This may not sound bad. In fact, it sounds like a good thing. I helped his account progress, right? Well, no. Unfortunately for my ex, he had what players commonly refer to as a pure account, meaning he never, ever dared to level his defense skill from level 1 in order to keep the lowest defense stats but have high offensive stats. Well, not anymore. Have fun with your permanent level 6 defense. Cycling through hundreds of possible forms of revenge in my head, I settled on getting rid of his house. It's quite an achievement in RuneScape to have a nice house of your own, and in fact, he had one of the nicest I had ever seen in the game. In order to have built it, he must have spent well over a few billion coins. Too bad I had disassembled it all in a matter of minutes, deleting it all into cyberspace. And there's no insurance either. He's going to have to rebuy everything with his non-existent money if he wants a new house. Bye-bye, Casa de Cheater. Scrolling through his friends list, I decided to act as him and pay a visit to his friends who are currently online and admit that I had cheated on my girlfriend and was fully proud of it. If his friends hadn't removed him by that point, I removed them. All of them. Lastly, to add a beautiful little cherry to this revenge-filled cake, I changed his username. You're able to change your username once a month on RuneScape, so I changed his to let everybody know that he's a dirty cheater. I obviously won't drop his username here, but I did the best I could to embarrass him with the 12-character limit. He should be able to reclaim his previous username in about 3 weeks, but if he waits too long, I'll be able to swipe it and slap it on a throwaway account of my own forever. He sent me a very hateful and aggressive message later that night, followed by pictures of him crying. I wrote him a sincere message officially ending the relationship, while also scaring him away by threatening to take him to court over sharing my nudes and possibly filing a cease and desist if he were to contact me anytime soon. I don't plan on doing any of that. I just don't want to speak to him ever again.
Karen was annoyed that I didn't evenly divide 7 by 2, posted by Meth Hardy. I used to work for a company where we went into schools in our area to perform a free 1-hour wacky science show teaching kids the importance of saving water. Our local area relies on aquifers, which are underground porous rock that stores rainfall, for the majority of our water, so it's important to teach kids both about how the water cycle works where we live and about not wasting water. This incident occurred 5 years ago and it just came on my Facebook memories, and it very much fits this sub. Myself and my colleague were at a school in a very affluent area performing our water show, teaching the kids in our own unimitatable, irreverent way. The school had invited parents into the assembly, so we had about 30 or so parents seated at the back of the hall along with the 200 or so kids. After the show, which went down an absolute treat, my colleague had gone to collect the car, which we couldn't park near the school, while I had remained behind to tidy up and move all of our kit to the front entrance to the school where he would be pulling up. Suddenly, a parent came up to speak to me. Karen says, "Hello, do you mind if I have a quick word?" I reply, "Yeah, of course not." "Well, let me start off by telling you how fantastic that show was." I'm waiting for the but I say, "Hey, thank you very much." "But," my internal monologue says, "there it is. I was wondering if you noticed that you had picked more boys than girls as your volunteers, rather than an equal number of each." "Okay, you're asking me if I realized that I didn't pick an equal number of boys and girls as my volunteers?" "Yes. Yes, I was aware of this, mainly because we need an odd number of volunteers in the show. It's very difficult to keep the numbers of each equal when the total number is odd." Karen looks at me while trying to think. "Did you notice that while we picked 4 boys and 2 girls for the aquifer experiment, we picked a girl as the solo volunteer for the toothbrushing experiment? And the toothbrushing volunteer does a lot more than the aquifer volunteers do. So, yesterday when we did this exact same show in a different school, we had 4 girls and 2 boys for the aquifer experiment and then a boy for the toothbrush. We always try to keep things as fair as possible. I'm just saying because my daughters were here today and I want them to enjoy science." "Well, hopefully they did." I also noticed that on your banner," and she indicates the pop-up banner off to one side, "that you have 2 boys and 1 girl on that. That's hardly equal." "Yeah, that is true, but with the size of the banner, 3 children was the right number. 2 would have left too much empty space, while 4 would have been too crowded." "Then why didn't they pick 2 girls?" "Well, because we made several mock-ups of the banner and showed them to different children, and the most popular design was that one." "Well, I don't think," I interrupt and say, "you may be pleased to see that the fun pack that each child gets to take home has only 1 boy and 1 girl on the cover." I pick up the pack and I show her. "That's nice." Karen walks off and the teacher comes over to me. The teacher says, "Hey, what was all that about?" "Apparently, I need to find a way to pick an equal number of boys and girls despite the total number adding up to an odd total." "Okay, so because you didn't pick either of her 2 daughters as any of your handful of volunteers out of 200 children in the school?" "It would seem that way, teacher." "What did you say to her?" "Basically that 7 isn't divisible by 2, but across multiple schools we make sure to keep things equal." "And what did she say?" "That's nice."
Kevin doesn't know what mold is, posted by Kentucky Fried Soy. My brother, the Kevin in this story, has never been the sharpest tool in the shed. He believes that dolphins cause cancer, but we aren't here to discuss that. One day, Kevin was eating a croissant and asking when we got blue cheese croissants. He was saying how delicious they were and when was the soonest we would have more. This was odd because the last time we bought croissants was weeks ago. I saw him holding a croissant that was covered in blue mold and just happily munching away at it. I told him that it was moldy and not safe to eat, but he insisted it was fine because it all tastes good to me. I threw out all the rest when he wasn't looking, so he couldn't eat any more blue cheese croissants. Oh, yeah, so y'all want to know about the dolphins. Okay, so about 5 or 6 years ago, Kevin was a young adolescent. We still had some hope his brain would develop further. He's very curious and loves to ask questions, so I was explaining how electromagnetic waves work in simple terms, and that electromagnetic waves with really high frequencies can cause cancer. He looks shocked and asks, "Wait, does that mean that dolphins cause cancer?" I had to keep questioning Kevin to figure out how on earth he came up with this conclusion. He thought that 1, electromagnetic waves and the waves in the ocean are the same, and 2, that all waves in the ocean are created by the movements of dolphins. Thus, he concluded, dolphins cause cancer. Dullest knife in the drawer, posted by Curious Cat 0070. I was visiting an associated section in our organization and knew the people in that section, at least in passing. As I walked by his desk, the admin assistant asked me, "Hey OP, what work status is Jenny on? I'm trying to do the time cards." "Hey man, I really have no idea. I don't work down here." "Well, I really need to know what status she's on because we're closing out the work week." Look, I'd love to tell you, but I work upstairs, not down here." "But what's her work status? I'm trying to finish the time cards." "You know, that's a great question for someone who actually works down here." "But I need to know her work status. Can you tell me that?" "I could tell you the airspeed velocity of an unladen swallow, but I have no idea what her work status is because I don't work down here." It's a Monty Python reference. "Huh? Oh, so what's her work status?" "You know, I think we're just going to have to chalk that up as one of the great mysteries of the universe," I said, and then broke eye contact and walked away. HOA Karen raided my house for toilet paper, disinfectant, and hand sanitizer, posted by a homeowner Phil. This happened over a year ago during the height of the pandemic in mid-2020. I'm a 29-year-old male and a homeowner. I bought a house in 2019 for my uncle because he was well set and wanted to retire to his second home by a lake. Before buying the house, my uncle warned me that the neighborhood has an HOA, but it only affects those who joined it, and my uncle did not. But the price my uncle was offering was half the home's value. I couldn't pass up the offer, so I bought a house in an HOA neighborhood that wasn't part of the HOA. Right after I moved in, I got a knock at the door, and when I opened it, I was greeted by an older woman with short graying blonde hair and a face covered in thick makeup, and was holding a welcome to the neighborhood gift basket. She introduced herself as the president of the HOA, then asked to come in so she could help me fill out some forms. I knew what she was trying to do because my uncle warned me she did this to every new homeowner in the area who wasn't a part of the HOA.
so I quickly and bluntly stated that I was not going to join her HOA. Her smile quickly disappeared and she started saying that I did not have a choice as all new homeowners are mandated to join. I told her I knew in advance that was a total lie and that I will not be paying any dues or fines and will be ready to call a lawyer if I have to. She called me a thorn to the neighborhood and said she'd be back, though we did not speak to each other for some time. I expected her to start sending me fines in the mail, but the most I usually got were letters stating that my grass was getting too tall or my driveway needed sweeping. Those never bothered me because they're normal home chores and need to be done regularly anyway. But several neighbors that were on the HOA side made it clear they didn't like me because I didn't join, just like my uncle. I said that was fine. We're neighbors, but we don't have to be friends. They said that was fine too, because I'm an outsider and they'll never accept me until I join the HOA. Later, in early 2020, I got word from a friend that people were starting to buy a lot of disinfectant, toilet paper, and hand sanitizer en masse. I decided the best option was to order these things online. I got 8 big 12 packs of toilet paper, a case of 20 bottles of hand sanitizer, 3 boxes of disposable latex gloves, a couple of boxes of disposable face masks, and a case of 20 large cans of brand name disinfectant spray. I set for the delivery to be signed for only as I did not trust anyone not to steal my packages if they were just left on my porch. When the packages were delivered, several neighbors saw me getting lots of toilet paper and some other packages that contained the other stuff. And just because I'm a paranoid guy, I still bought more of the same stuff when I saw it in stores, like those small cheap 4-packs of toilet paper or off-brand disinfectant sprays. I bought them because I had a feeling some friends or family might need some soon. And I was right. As expected, toilet paper, disinfectant, and sanitizer pretty much disappeared from store shelves for miles around, and people were fighting over it and hoarding it. Meanwhile, I've got a very generous supply that I still haven't come close to using up. The word of my supply got around fast when people started needing some. A friend of mine ran out of toilet paper and had no hand sanitizer, so I gave him a couple of the generic 4-packs of TP and a bottle of sanitizer at my door. A few family members ran out too, and I shared with them as well. They were all extremely grateful. But I ended up with several neighbors knocking on my door and asking to buy my supply or wanting handouts. But I refused and said I only gave some of what I had away to friends and family. And they made it pretty clear to me before that we'd never be friends since I refused to join their HOA. So, if I were to give some to one neighbor, they'd all want my supplies, and then I'd run out, really fast. They didn't like this and harassed me several times from the sidewalk, but I just ignored them. Later, the HOA Karen showed up at my door and told me several neighbors had run out of all the items that this post is about. Then said she wasn't asking, but demanding that I share my stock with my neighbors to set a good example. I told her to buzz off because that had nothing to do with me. I may be a jerk, but I'm a well-prepared jerk, and I've read her HOA bylaws online. So, even if I was a member of her HOA, which I was not, I wouldn't have to give up my stock either way. She left while yelling at me that one day I'd regret not being a good neighbor or being a part of her HOA. The next time I went to work, I was notified around noon by the cameras I had at my house that there was a thief breaking into my home. I could see video of them on my smartphone, and it looked like a woman in a spandex suit with her face covered by a hockey mask. I called the police immediately and was allowed to clock out at work so I could rush home. Right around the time I got there, the cops were walking HOA Karen out in handcuffs to a police cruiser. She'd broken into my home by using a crowbar to force open the back door and was tossing all of my toilet paper and any other supplies she could grab out into my backyard, where her kids were picking it up and bagging it. I pressed charges, and HOA Karen got 6 months in jail and probation. HOA Karen's husband called me to apologize for his wife and told me that he had been planning a divorce for a while because this isn't the first time she'd been in trouble with the law. And CPS got involved too because she was using her kids to help steal from me. So he was going to file for full custody in the divorce. HOA Karen didn't return, and someone new was elected HOA president in her place. Her husband didn't move, and I see him from time to time. And there's no hard feelings between us. And yes, he did get full custody of his kids because his wife had a longer history with the law than I thought. We're sort of friends now too, as we've occasionally had a beer together and he helped me replace my back door that his ex broke. I'm making this post more than a year later because I just saw HOA Karen again. I was visiting some friends in another city and saw her working at the local supermarket there bagging groceries. As soon as we saw each other, she obviously recognized me because she scowled and refused to look at me again the entire time I was there. Karma is a real witch, isn't it, Karen? Look at this, man. You got OP, who is preparing for the worst that the pandemic had to offer as far as supply-wise, really just bagging it up, and then Karen is like, oh, you're not joining our HOA. You are not going to be our friends anymore. Why? I don't even want to be your friends. And then she tries to break into his home and steal grocery supplies. What are you doing, HOA Karen? What are you doing? And to top it all off, the poor husband here, he was trying to get it out of there. She's crazy. She had her kids. Her kids were being thieves too. What kind of example as a mother is that? What kind of example of a parent of an HOA leader? You're supposed to be not stealing from the people that, I don't even care if they join or not. Karen, what are you doing? You definitely deserve the loss here. OP took the win. Way to go, OP. Forced me to get rid of my pet bunny. Enjoy the bunny-ocalypse, posted by NorCal HOA Alliance. This was actually my neighbor's revenge. When I was 9, a new neighbor moved in across the street. They had a 9-year-old girl who had 2 pet bunnies. I became fast friends with the new neighbor, and several of the neighborhood kids would regularly come by her house to play with the bunnies. For 2 years, everything was fine. No one had any issues, and we all lived happily in our white picket fence neighborhood. Enter HOA Hole, referred to as Karen from here on out. Now, Karen lived on the other side of the new neighbors. Our HOA was fairly reasonable. Don't paint your house neon pink, cut your grass, otherwise you're safe. But Karen was high-ranking on the board and had a tendency to nitpick about stupid things. After 2 years, Karen had gotten bored and decided it was a problem that new neighbors had bunnies. Why? Well, because deep in our HOA bylaws, it states that you cannot have any non-domesticated pets. Bunnies, even though theirs had never been left outside or hurt any of the kids, were considered non-domesticated. Karen made a stink to the board and insisted that something be done immediately. HOA sends a letter that the bunnies get gone ASAP or fines would start accumulating. New neighbor tried to go talk to Karen and explained that they're his daughter's pets, they're harmless and so on, and Karen wanted none of it. She smirked and told his daughter to tell bugs bye-bye. What Karen didn't know is that new neighbors were only a few weeks away from moving back across the country to be closer to family. They'd done a private sale on the house, no signage outside, and most people didn't even know. New neighbor could have just ignored the letter and he would have been gone before the fees could hit. But no, that would be too easy. What did he do instead? He drove to a friend's property in a rural area of town, captured 4 wild bunnies, and set them loose in the neighborhood the day before he moved. And boy did those bunnies do what bunnies do. And where did they do it? Where he and his wife had spent years creating a bushy, flowery oasis. Within a month or 2, the bunny population doubled, a few more, and it tripled. Within a few months, our neighborhood was overrun. For the most part, they were harmless, stayed out of the way, and added a homey feel to our yards. For Karen, it was havoc on his beautiful yard, and he spent months petitioning that the HOA eradicate them. to no avail. 20 years later, and the neighborhood is still a bunny hideaway. Karen still lives there and has long given up on protecting his beautiful backyard from the bunnies. All because he wouldn't leave a 9-year-old girl's pet bunnies alone. I mean, you just look at this situation here. This male Karen thinks he runs the place because it's HOA. Oh, you're breaking the rules. You got a little bunny. Let it go, man. Let it go. They're not harming anything. And just because that one rule, that butterfly effect or whatever, bunny effect in this case, comes out, the whole neighborhood becomes a bunny haven. 2 decades later, he's still there in his older age now, looking back at the decision he made some years ago, not understanding how all these bunnies magically got here. But lo and behold, OP's friend had this malicious compliance, pro-natural, crazy revenge, and just completely left him a mark that he will never forget of what happened with the bunny-ocalypse. Way to go, OP and neighbor, way to go. HOA board demanded my supplies and entry to my home during the 2021 winter power outage. Attempted break-in when I refused. Posted by I'm Just a Neighbor. I live in a neighborhood that an HOA was formed in over a decade ago. I was essentially raised by my grandparents because my own parents really didn't want me and just wanted my little sister, whom they repeatedly said was the one they did not regret. I was born from an accidental teen pregnancy, and my parents showed very little love for me. So from age of 10, my grandparents raised me, and they left me their house when they passed away. I never married, just wasn't interested, but I am a bit of a paranoid man with keeping supplies stocked. When COVID hit, I already had a generous supply of soap, sanitizer, toilet paper, paper towels, disinfectant, bottled water, canned food, medical supplies, and even whiskey. And I still keep all of that well stocked. But it was from years of buying that stuff little by little. I also have a generator and a generous supply of filled propane tanks for heat and some insulated sleeping bags. I wish I had a wood stove too, but the house wasn't built with one. The HOA and I also did not get along. My grandparents turned down their invitation to join, and so did I when I inherited the house. Most of the time, the HOA left me alone. However, back then, the president would come to our door to say something whenever he had a bone to pick with us. It never got him far, and I did kind of find it amusing to see how my grandpa would send him packing. When the pandemic hit, word spread about my stash of supplies. I willingly shared it with some of my neighbors and friends, but certainly not with anyone on the HOA board, as they've been a thorn in my family's side for years. When the HOA was formed, they demanded for months that my grandparents join, and they had the balls to try numerous underhanded tactics, all of which I documented in various ways. They thought they could pick on an elderly couple and say they were members whether they liked it or not. They stated rules that they completely made up and repeatedly threatened us, even saying they would come into the house to take away our guns because the HOA didn't approve of any firearms. We checked their bylaws, and there was nothing about guns on it. In fact, they were trying to force the same thing on some of the other residents, all of whom fought back. And that fake bylaw was soon dropped when there were talks of rebellion. But the HOA still didn't leave us alone. I convinced my grandparents to let me install CCTV so I could catch every further interaction of the HOA board showing up, demanding my grandparents join and threatening them. This turned out to be a very good idea, as the HOA attempted to have all 3 vehicles towed from my grandparents' driveway. We confronted the tow truck driver that was attempting to take my grandpa's old wagon, and he said to take it up with the HOA, as they were authorized to tow from them. When we told them that our house was not a part of the HOA, the driver didn't care and took the car anyway. We called the police to get the car back, and the police had to talk to the HOA board, who were forced to admit being in the wrong as they were all sniveling cowards. The police then had some words with the tow company, and they brought the car back free of charge. The tow driver glared at us after he put the wagon back, and he never returned. Well, that incident was the final nail in the coffin, and my grandpa started a lawsuit against the HOA board for harassment, and when their lawyer saw my pile of evidence, he told them to just settle out of court. The HOA paid the court and lawyer fees, and my grandparents got a few grand on top of that. From then on, the HOA board stayed far away from us, but there was obvious animosity. They even tried to get our neighbors to shun us, which did not work out. When I inherited the house from my grandparents, the HOA already knew me well, and they didn't really bother to try and pull the same stunts of harassment they had before with my grandparents. But they did try once to empathetically suggest I join, but I told them to kick rocks and I'll leave them alone if they leave me alone. If not, they were free to answer to my 12 gauge and police, as I'm not the type of person to hesitate in defending myself or calling the cops if the HOA starts making trouble with me. I would also have no problem suing for harassment like my grandparents did. It was clear to them that leaving me alone for the moment was the better choice. So that was supposed to be the last time I had any trouble with them, at least until the incident a couple of years later that I'm about to describe. As supplies became available again in late 2020, I replenished my stock. However, the 2021 January ice storm hit my area hard, and we were without power for over a week in the dead of winter. And I was the only person in the neighborhood properly prepared for it. I had some neighbors with generators, but many of them ran out of gas to generate power within a few days. My generator wasn't enough to power my whole house, just key things like my fridge and freezer, my microwave, and a few other necessities. I kept my house warm with propane, and I had battery-powered lighting, plenty of books to read, portable DVD players, my laptop, and I had a large number of filled propane tanks in a variety of sizes at the ready to keep warm with. So I was A-okay. My neighbors, not so much though. No one could drive anywhere. It was about minus 15 degrees Fahrenheit outside, if not colder. There was debris everywhere from fallen trees, and the ground was covered in a sheet of very slippery ice that was on top of snow. And there were many fallen trees, some of which completely blocked the roads. My next-door neighbors, who were friends of mine, were having a very hard time keeping warm. At the time, they had a baby who was only a few months old, and they were not prepared for the outage at all. And there was one more family across the street whose house had a tree fall on it. So I invited both families into my home. I also took in a retired elderly couple from a few houses down that were freezing because they had no form of heat. All of those people stayed with me for the duration of the outage. I invited the first family over right after the power went out because I knew they were not prepared. And the family whose house was damaged by a tree, I brought over while the storm was still going on in the middle of the night. When the tree landed on their house, it took out an entire section of it and exposed the inside of the house to the elements. The father of the family came to me in a panic, and I tied a rope to my porch and we made our way to his damaged house to get his family back to mine. We used the rope to pull ourselves back to my house because of all the ice, darkness, and storming frozen winds. I managed to get the whole family over, and after the storm was over, they also brought what supplies they had, including more propane, another generator, and more gasoline they'd been storing. That all went pretty far for heating and powering my house. I had more than enough supplies for all of us, and collectively, we had a myriad of electronic devices to use, many of which were rechargeable, but I had a lot of batteries for those that weren't, and those were great at keeping kids entertained. They also had handheld gaming devices of their own, and we were able to keep charged thanks to the generators. I wasn't used to living with other people since my grandparents died, but it felt good to help them out. Then, there was an elderly couple down the street, all referred to as George and Gracie, that came to stay with me too. They were good friends of my grandparents, so I checked in on them and found out that they had no heat without electricity and were sitting in a running car just to use the heater in that. George had just barely managed to chip off enough ice to get the car door open so they could sit in it. I brought them in, and they sort of became like the temporary grandparents of the house and helped look after the kids. The HOA board, though, was somewhat aware of my supplies, and they could easily see my house was thriving during the outage. So they came over in a group to talk to me on the second day of the outage. They had some idea of having everyone in the HOA board go stay in one building, and they wanted that building to be my house because I already had supplies and heat. I told them that I wasn't hosting their group in my home. I was already taking care of 2 families and an elderly couple not related to me, and that was enough. I got a lecture on being neighborly from them, but I just lectured them back that I had made my decision and to look for somewhere else to bundle up. And besides that, I clearly did not trust them for obvious reasons. And they were the last people in the neighborhood that I'd let into my home. Then I shut my door in their faces. If I had hosted all of those entitled people and their families, my house would have been beyond crowded and all of my supplies would have been taken from me. In situations like those, people will resort to taking and calling it sharing. I wasn't about to risk that, but I did still hand out water and sanitizer to neighbors that came by. The HOA board wasn't done with me, though. On the third day of the outage, they crowded at my house with their families, demanding to be allowed entry into my home. I told them I had no room and to leave me alone. The HOA board didn't take no for an answer, though, and they tried to force their way in. But I am not a small man. I knocked their leader right down and off my porch and told them that if they tried that again, I'd make sure to notify police later. I was then backed up by the other men I'd taken in, and they were armed. The HOA president yelled at me that they were all freezing and they needed entry. But I was already hosting 10 people in my house and giving out supplies to neighbors. I wasn't going to take on any more. Then I told the HOA board to leave or I'd be getting my shotgun. Well, after they left, the two dads, George and I, had a bit of a meeting and decided we needed to take turns keeping watch. I'll refer to the dads as Dad 1 and the other as Dad 2 in the order of which I invited them over. And George as George, of course. For an old man in his 70s, he had some strength and grit to him, like a man 20 years younger. We all agreed there was no way those butts of the HOA board would take this all lying down. At times like this, men will become animals to get what they want. So, we all started taking shifts guarding my house and supplies. I slept on my couch with my 12 gauge next to me, and on that very night, I got woken up by Dad 2, who was currently on watch yelling for me. I came running into the garage to find Dad 2 against the garage door and holding it shut. He said there were people outside trying to force it open. It was right about that moment we heard a very loud gunshot. It turned out to be George at my back door. He'd grabbed his own shotgun that he'd brought from his house and fired it into the air outside when he caught two men in my backyard trying to get in through my door. Dad 1 woke up and came running out to help, and we all ran into the backyard. We found my side gate had been forced open. The old latch had been broken. We made our way out front from there and saw roughly 10 people trying to run across the road with weapons in hand, like bats and claw hammers and crowbars, and they were repeatedly slipping and falling on the ice that covered the road. All of them were the HOA board members and people related to them, like their teenage sons or brothers. We blinded them all with 1,000 lumen flashlights and rounded them up at the edge of the sidewalk. We had them all drop their weapons, and George mused that we should break a few of their fingers just to scare them a bit more. They all begged us not to report them to police, and I said to never come back or the next time somebody might get shot. They skittered off like frightened children trying to run across an ice rink. We did a makeshift repair on my gate to keep it closed, and the rest of the week all 4 of us spent nights on guard. We played lots of cards and board games, drank whiskey, and did regular patrols around the house. No one from the HOA board came back to bother us. There was an occasional knock for help from someone needing something though, and the neighbors were really needing water and I was running out of it. So I'd taken to melting ice in pots and boiling it with an electric hot plate, then filling jugs. That gave several of my neighbors clean drinking water. The rest of the outage was otherwise uneventful until the thaw kicked in and more stuff started falling as the ice broke apart. When the ice and snow had all cleared up, the widespread damage was pretty evident. It took the county months to clean up all the debris. We found out later that the other neighbors had followed our example and basically banded together 3 or so families per home to try and stay warm and share supplies. Pretty much, the whole of the HOA board wasn't welcome to join in since they were hated by pretty much everyone by that point. So they all had to band together in the one house they owned that had a wood-burning stove, and they burned pretty much anything they could get their hands on, some of which they took from neighbors. There was evidence of repeated thefts and vandalism all over the neighborhood.
Haha, and the key suspects were the HOA board and their families. But none of the neighbors could prove it was them. My CCTV was off due to the power being out, but we made sure that all of our neighbors knew we'd caught the HOA board trying to break into my house. After the power was finally back on, there was a lot of work to do. Like Dad 2 making an insurance claim to fix his house. Dad 2's family actually ended up staying with me for a while longer before the home repairs could really get started. George and Gracie's old house suffered a few broken pipes due to the freezing cold. But George is a retired plumber, so he handled it. A large limb had fallen on Dad 1's car and did enough damage that it was later considered totaled. I didn't really have any time to help any of them out much, as I had to go back to work a couple days after the power was back on, and I was kept very busy for a while. Being sick of the HOA board, the bulk of the neighborhood filed in February to have an emergency HOA meeting, and in said meeting, they wanted the entire board to resign. They refused to step down, and the residents had to get lawyers involved. It did go to court, and the HOA itself was found to be violating the law several ways and embezzling funds. The entire HOA was shut down pending a full investigation. At first, it was just a temporary shutdown, and then it became permanent. All of the former board members have left the neighborhood, and I ended up making some great friends with Dad 1 and Dad 2, and we're regular backyard drinking buddies. I pay a visit to George and Gracie now and then too. They've all taken to keeping supplies like I have as well, just in case this sort of thing ever happens again. This went from just no HOA to pro-nuclear insanity because the HOA is supposed to have the homeowners help them, which does not happen obviously, and in this case, they wanted the supplies. OP said, hey, I'm stretched thin already. We're already helping people out. You guys don't like me. You don't even like my family anyway. We have years, decades of history. That's the important part there. And then they come in, take their whole crew, and break into this house like a gang war of HOA versus not. It's literally insane. The Dad 1, Dad 2, George, OP, all banding together, everybody just going, getting all the kids, teenagers. This is literally an insane, outsiders type of battle here. But you know what, OP, you stood your ground. You knew the history with the grandparents and how the HOA screwed them over too, or at least tried to. Even leading up to the storm, they tried to mess you over as well. But you held strong, you held true, and you nailed it. Way to go, OP. Vindictive ex-wife illegally signed application to the local HOA in my name. Posted by Spurred one last time. I'll start this off by saying my ex is vindictive as heck. We've been fully divorced since about right before the pandemic started. We sold the house we shared, and I didn't have to pay her alimony because she cheated and we're in an at-fault state. It was as messy since D-Day. All of the stereotypes. First, the sobbing, and then the trickle truth saying, I love you. It was just one time. Okay, it was 2 years. And then the gaslighting followed by, I'm gonna take you for everything, before packing her crap and walking out. I feel like I never really knew the woman my ex was in all the time we were together. We were married 5 years and together for 7. And in 2 of those 5 married years, she had affairs with 3 other men. The final one being a foreign businessman out of some sort from what I could figure out. Yes, I got tested for STDs and was thankfully negative. Yes, she got pregnant by the final affair partner, and no, I didn't sign the birth certificate because I found out about all the affairs before the baby was born, thanks to a call from the first affair partner. My ex tried to go full scorched earth on me. But since we live in and were married in an at-fault state, she lost. We didn't pay equally into our house, and the equity was divided 70-30. So I got a pretty good cash payout when I sold our marital home to put as a down payment on a different house closer to my job. It's a bit of a downgrade, but suits a single guy in his 30s like me just fine. My ex did show up to my house once, but I refused to let her in. She barked and complained at me that I'd financially ruined her in the divorce. I said that if she was fully willing to do that to me first, and the witch had the audacity to say it should have been my life screwed over and not hers. I laughed so
hard and said it was karma. She yelled that she'd sue me for what was rightfully hers. I said if she was going to sue me, then to go ahead and sue me. It'd end up the same way in court because she had nothing but a false sob story. She was the cheater, not me. I'm no angel, but I didn't do anything to her. And then she was the one who ruined our marriage. She then said that she'd tell everyone she could that I abused her, and I said that I'd sue her for defamation if she did. And I was recording our interaction and had those words saved to my phone. She went wide-eyed and her jaw dropped. The look people are calling the surprised Pikachu face was this. Then I asked why she was there, if not to just try and make trouble, because she had a new man in her life that knocked her up. She just huffed at me and said he isn't around much, and she's stuck in a tiny apartment living off his child support till he comes back. It was immature of me, I know, but I did the bit of playing the world's smallest violin. She yelled at me to go screw myself, and then I yelled back that I'd sooner do that than her anytime. She raged at me and then got in her car to leave. I haven't seen her since. There's an HOA in my neighborhood, but I was not legally obligated to join it because the last owner of my house was not a member. I made sure of that through a real estate lawyer as well. The HOA had no grounds to force me to join, and they were not happy about it. The HOA president would show up with forms every week for the first month demanding that I sign them. Then she threatened to take me to court, to which I had to get a cease and desist sent to her from my lawyer to make her stop that. So she started harassing me by looking for any infractions that she possibly could to report me to the city. An inspector came out several times and found nothing wrong. In fact, I offered one of them a burger while grilling, and they graciously accepted. Did I mention the HOA hates barbecues and parties that aren't approved in advance? Well, they do. And I like to grill when the weather's good. And my neighbors actually love me for it because I invite them over. I had the police called on me several times for noise complaints because I was playing music on a Saturday afternoon while having my friends over. The HOA president I caught trespassing once when she was trying to peer into my windows. I called the police, but she denied ever doing it. So I got cameras. She hasn't trespassed since, but I still got repeated passive-aggressive letters saying that my cameras were not an approved addition to my house. Some months ago, I started getting letters for fines in the mail, and when I contacted the HOA, their representative claimed that they had it on record that I joined and needed to pay all the fees effective immediately. I told them that that was not possible. And then they emailed a scanned copy of the forms and they had a signature on them. But it was not mine. It was very similar in some ways, and I recognized right away as being my ex's handwriting. She knew what my signature looked like, but it was a loose imitation at best. I got in touch with a lawyer right away over the forged signature. But the HOA still demanded to go to court, and it took 7 months before that happened. Meanwhile, they were stacking unpaid fines against me weekly, and they were threatening to put a lien on my house. We went to court, and the HOA president looked very smug, but my lawyer pointed out how the signature wasn't the same as mine and was very inconsistent in the various forms. I'd never allowed the HOA president in my house, and I'd never requested the forms. The idiot HOA president actually slammed her palm on the table and said it was still binding. But when pressed where the fraudulent signature came from, she admitted my ex-wife called the HOA and they sent her the forms, then got them back in the mail signed. But then she actually claimed she thought that I'd signed them. The judge looked at her and asked if she was serious, and she confirmed she was. The judge then asked how a woman I was no longer married to, that had never even lived with me in my current residence, was supposed to have any bearing on whether or not I joined her HOA. She went quiet. quiet, and I could see the "oh crap" look on her face as the hamster wheels were turning and she seemed to finally mentally put the pieces together. My lawyer then counterclaimed that what the HOA did was blatant fraud and legal actions must be taken. And they were. I countersued the HOA for the emotional distress of the harassment I've gotten since moving in, which I had lots of proof of. That won me about 10 grand after lawyer fees that I decided to put toward my mortgage. The HOA president was removed from her throne. I like to think she was kicking and screaming. She was also slapped with a hefty fine. I've seen her outside a few times, and she always looks at me like I'm the devil. The HOA itself had to pay all of my legal fees too. I wanted to go after my ex for forging my signature, but I can't because not long after she forged my signature on those forms, she apparently left the country to be with her third affair partner. She's somewhere in Europe from what I can see of the final post on her Facebook before she disappeared. So I can't do anything against her unless she ever returns to the US. So that was a wash. I'm not getting letters from the HOA anymore though, and the new president has promised to keep things completely cordial from now on. I still don't feel like I got much of a win in this though. Other than the $10,000 payout, it all felt like a huge waste of time. Interesting comments here. Deleted says, statute of limitations. Even if nothing happens because she's out of the country, get a default judgment since she will not show up to court. That may even block her from re-entry. And Crazy Supervisor says, it won't block her from re-entry, but she will be detained in customs. It will likely force her return as well because she won't be able to renew any visas, because countries tend to not want each other's criminals and problems. Knowing this information, OP, if you are able to act upon this, you could still come out with an upper hand even though you originally thought you couldn't, and then get that final pro-level revenge on the ex, or nuclear level if you wanted it to be. Oh boy, like this was next multiple level. Like it sucks that the person that you married and trusted cannot be trusted anymore, and then you had that horrible fallout and you move to this new place. The HOA Karen gives you a horrible time, as they always do, as we know, and then come to find out the ex forged the signatures, so it's like they were on a team working together without knowing it, or maybe they did know it. Maybe we don't know the conversations that happened between ex and HOA Karen here, but I could just be curious and confirmed to believe that they were probably sketchy and shady, just knowing the past of these two folks right here. And then she moves out of the country to go with random dude. This is just a crazy situation, but at least the lawyer fees got paid out from the HOA. Karen got dethroned, and the ex-wife is in some other lands away from OP in the USA. And then the $10,000 payout to take in pocket on your way. I'm sorry I had to go through this, OP, but at least you have this resolution and put it behind you. Gotta love HOAs. Posted by Dragon Rider 1964. My great-grandfather purchased about 3,000 acres of land in Florida in the late 1800s. This land has been in the family ever since. There's been a family home on the property throughout. Land is zoned as agricultural, and we've raised livestock and farmed various items over the years. Ownership of the land has been passed down over the years, with the oldest getting the house. My father passed in 2000 and left the house to me. Now my mom still lives in the house, and the land was split between 3 siblings equally, about 1,000 acres each. My brother, who lives in California, and sister, living in Texas, quickly sold their lots to a property development company, about the same that I had purchased a neighboring lot, 850 acres, as my own. The development company quickly purchased a lot of land and began building family units, which are 3, 4, and 5 bedroom homes. This company repeatedly made attempts to get me to sell the 1,850 acres that I owned. They fought the county to get land rezoned so that I could not use it as a farm. That failed since I was actively using it, and land became zoned as agricultural/residential. In 2015, the development company completed the project and transferred control of the community to an HOA, which was registered in 2016. The meat and potatoes. As soon as the HOA became officially recognized by the county, the board pushed to force me and my family to join. Nope, that is not happening. We have received visits from HOA board members explaining how we are in violation of the rules and how we must pay fines they have imposed. Fines have included livestock and farm animals not allowed, farm equipment left visible, unauthorized structures on site, and we have 2 barns, 3 storage sheds, a detached 3-car garage, and 4 covered feed stations for animals. They also said cars and vehicles not parked in a garage was a fine. The driveway was not properly maintained, unapproved fencing, the house painted the wrong color. They went to house trim color not approved, front door style and color not approved, trees unapproved, lawn unsightly. They kept going and going with mailbox not correct style, mailbox not within community height standards. Fines started at $50 up to $1,500 and incurred massive late fees. And the biggest was failure to sign the HOA membership form. Now, I am an attorney, however, I'm not versed in property law, so I hired someone who is. And she has been having fun. Cease and desist orders at least once a year, several trespass orders against board members and the HOA itself, at least 3 court cases to get fines and property liens removed. As you can imagine, this has been trying. In January 2019, I filed plans and was approved to build a 6-foot concrete and stucco wall running the length of my property. This wall will be 5 feet onto my side of the property line and will be maintained by me. The plans were on file and the HOA had time to contest them. In October 2019, work began. The side of the wall was leveled, and this brought about the HOA to file numerous complaints for noise and unapproved improvements. Several times, the HOA made attempts to have equipment towed or removed even though it was parked on my property. In February 2020, the wall was completed, which included lighting and security cameras and a large decorative iron gate at my main driveway. I also had a new driveway installed. Figured that a nice, clean, well-maintained wall would make the HOA happy. Nope. I did not mow the 5 feet of grass along the gate as well as the HOA would like. I also did not bag the grass clippings. The wall was the wrong color, and my wife chose sand as it was a neutral color, and the wall was too high. HOA laws are 4 feet max. Since the issue with the virus, this HOA has had way too much time. They started by repainting my wall and sending me the bill. They started removing and disabling my lights and security cameras and sending me the bill. And they have a company that dug up and resodded the 5-foot strip of grass to the HOA requirements and sent me the bill, which includes a year of maintenance. My attorney nearly laughed herself into a coma. The outcome: it did not take long. The HOA, its board of directors, and the companies they hired were all ordered to appear in court. After hearing all sides and seeing all documentation, the judge ruled. The company that painted the wall has 30 days to repaint it the color that it was. The company that disabled and removed the lights and security cameras have 30 days to return them to working order, and the grass is allowed to remain. The HOA was ordered to absorb all costs. This includes the work they ordered and all the work needed to return my property to the way I had it. Further, the judge ordered that the HOA, from now until eternity, is to have no contact with me or my family. Now, I am going to request a permit to build a rifle range on my property. Oh crap, OP, this is a shining star example of someone who goes on, knows their stuff about their land, about their house, its history, what you can and cannot do, and then the HOA comes in, tries to bully you and take advantage. See, notice that theme right there, right? They came to OP and they just shoved him like, you're going to listen to us. Most people would say, okay, fine, I'll sign it, I'll do whatever you want me to do, just leave me alone. Or, okay, you're scaring me, I'll do what you say, don't mess me up, don't hurt me. Well, OP says, wait, that's some bullcrap. I know actually what to really do. And all of these fines that are meant to scare people, he fights back against, gets a lawyer, he's the attorney, boom, 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 all this stuff. And then finally, Everything falls on the HOA. They have to pay everything, get everything back in order, and then leave them alone. That right there is a prize in itself, is it not? And then he's going to request a permit to build a rifle range on the property. I don't know if that's a joke, but dang it, that's a good one. That's a nice move, OP. Congratulations, good job on standing your ground, representing your family, and way to go. When Evil Mama Bear tried to restart the HOA, posted by Craigle Tom. Now, the neighborhood my mother's house is in had an HOA that was disbanded in the early 90s for the pretty stereotypical reasons: corrupt leaders, misappropriation of funds, and so on. I really don't have many details on it since I was very little when it went down, but my mother had apparently been openly aiming for a seat on the HOA council for years, so she was really sore when the HOA was gone because she could no longer run for a position. Fast forward to 1999. Evil Mama Bear had been trying to quote the old HOA covenants to the neighborhood for years and insisted that the rules and regulations set forth when the HOA was active should still be abided by. Literally, no one wanted to listen to her. So my mother started putting flyers around the neighborhood that detailed that she was restarting the HOA without their approval and would be its first new president. The neighbors ended up in an uproar over this and showed up to her public meeting. And there, she was verbally ripped to shreds as nearly every single homeowner in the neighborhood not only denied their support of another HOA, but also made it clear to her what she was trying to do was not legal. My mother was incensed by this, and no surprise, she didn't even have my father's support, which was something that she'd initially been counting on. But he refused from the onset of her scheme, and when the neighborhood all refused to recreate the HOA, Evil Mama Bear went off on my dad for not being supportive of her. After she gaslighted herself into nearly being out of breath, my dad told her she was just looking for a way to lord over the neighborhood, and he'd never support that. She tried to argue with him some more, but he just ended the conversation and walked away. Somehow, that still didn't stop my mother, though. She went and contacted a sleazy lawyer about trying to get the HOA running again without the support of the residents. Her hope was that there was some sort of law that could reactivate the HOA on different grounds. The lawyer went through all of the old HOA documents and state laws over a couple of days and told my mother there was nothing that could be done as it was not enforceable, and that without the consent and signed support of enough people in the neighborhood, there was no way to legally restart the HOA. Then proceeded to bill Evil Mama Bear for the time he spent looking through all of that. Since my mother hired the sleazy lawyer herself under the table, she had to pay him. But she hated paying anyone for anything because she was so cheap. Now, an important fact of note was that my dad hadn't trusted Evil Mama Bear with his money for years and no longer kept joint bank accounts with her. And so she had no way to access his money. So she filed for a new credit card using his name and then used said credit card to pay the lawyer instead. My dad noticed a new credit card statement in his name pretty fast and nearly filed for fraud when my mother came clean out of fear. He demanded she pay off the credit card and then have said card deactivated. My mother didn't want to, but he threatened to call the fraud department of his bank on her. I still remember hearing the argument where she tried to claim that he couldn't do that because they were married and that everything that was his was also hers. That meant that she could do what she did and he'd still have to pay. Dad called BS on that and said that he'd contest the charges and get the card removed from his name, which would have left my mother in some serious legal trouble for fraud and debt collection. And so, Evil Mama Bear begrudgingly paid off the money owed, and my dad cut the card to little pieces with scissors. My mother had the money to pay the lawyer all along. She just preferred to keep the cash and put any expenses she could on my father. But he always stopped her, and she tried to pull the shared assets logic because they were married, though that ended when they divorced. Evil Mama Bear still spent the next few years trying to quote the HOA covenants to neighbors. but she was always dismissed or laughed at every single time she tried. A few people started referring to her as President Wannabe. To this day, no HOA has formed in the neighborhood again, and even if one did, they'd never vote in Evil Mama Bear. I can only imagine what would happen if she tried to pull this crap in Texas after she moves there. Now, I've had a few people messaging me that the lawyer I spoke of in the story that my mother went to wasn't sleazy just by association with my mother and just did what normal lawyers do. Well, he was known by reputation to overcharge people, and my own lawyer told me some time ago that he had first-hand experience with the sleazy lawyer because he knew him in person. The guy would intentionally take longer than needed to do anything so he could charge more time from clients. That, among other shady things he did, bit him in the butt some years ago, and he shut down his office. Oh man, just when you think an HOA Karen is bad enough, it's your mom. Oh, OP, I am so sorry to go through that. And then the battles with the dad over the finances, being like, I'm just going to make use and abuse this marriage covenant here, and then just do what I want to do and say we can do it because I'm married, and then blah, blah, blah. Karen, seriously, you thought you were going to get away with opening up a new card with the guy's name, charging a shady lawyer when the dad, is financially savvy in the first place. And just, why does it seem like all these HOA Karens never think it through? Seriously, they just never do, and it all comes back to bite President Wannabe, Evil Mama Bear right in the butt, just like it did her shady lawyer that she was with. I don't know if she wasn't with him, but you know what? It wouldn't surprise me if she was, huh? OP, I am so sorry, but you came out ahead of this, I sure hope. Corrupt Condo Association counters change, posted by B26354. I purchased my townhouse in the late 2000s. The previous owners were motivated to sell for a good price. It was exactly what I wanted. 2 bedrooms, multiple bathrooms, and a garage. From the mandatory home inspection, I was told about several potential problems with the unit. Some were internal, and others dealt with an outside balcony, leaky windows, and cracked exterior paint. Before finalizing the sale, I was given the opportunity to ask about these issues and was told that I was responsible for everything inside the townhouse, and the outside problems were handled by the condo association, and I just had to submit requests for repair. The condo association fee was very cheap for this area, so I considered that a plus. I closed on the sale, and I moved in without any problems. The total number of units in the complex is about 130, so it's a decent size. Some have like 2 bedrooms, some 3, and only a few, like mine, have garages with exterior balconies on them. When I moved in, I was presented with a list of the association's bylaws for the property. Nothing major, most were what you'd expect, like keeping your entryway clean, dogs on leashes, guest parking, and such. There was a 1 pet limit that I could see everyone was ignoring, so I saw that they were a bit lenient with the rules. I became friends with a neighbor, and she told me that the association was slow to handle problems. In fact, most of the units, conjoined in groups of 6 or more, were in dire need of new paint. Almost every unit had problems with their windows, but the association was only replacing windows on the backs of the units, and only a handful at a time. The association's communication was pretty poor. We'd get infrequent newsletters, but they had an underlying tone of, "We'll get to your issues when we can, no sooner than we feel like." They would also announce condo association board elections, but there seemed to be little interest, so they would appoint other owners to the board as needed. About 2 years in, I got a printed newsletter from an owner in the complex, who we'll call Mike, claiming the board is ignoring the owners. It detailed a few things that weren't being addressed, like the paint in the windows, and the owner protests were being ignored. The board wasn't even holding annual open user meetings, which are specified in the association bylaws. Those meetings were also for holding elections of new board members. The letter demanded a change in the situation. Enter Karen. Not her actual name, but it rhymes with Karen. She was the association's treasurer on the board. She was controlling the board, and her word was apparently, quote, law, unquote. That newsletter specifically called for her to step down. Next thing we know, there's an official association newsletter mailed to us that calls the owner's newsletter a complete fabrication and claimed Mike had ulterior motives. There was nothing to address the problems that Mike mentioned. It was just a generalized attack on him. Mike was initially asking for access to the association's books, and the association refused to show them to him. This is guaranteed in the association's bylaws. We received another newsletter detailing this and how he was going to take them to court if he was continually blocked. Another response from the association was mailed, but it was just attacking Mike and questioning his motives. I was visited by another neighbor who was circulating a petition demanding change, and I gladly signed it. Nothing was being done, aside from standard groundskeeping and the occasional emergency repair. We received a few more newsletters from Mike and several rebuttals from the association. Mike successfully sued to have access to the books. And from the newsletters, he reported that what he saw was just a list of code numbers, not names and dollar amounts for payouts. There was no way to really know who was receiving the money or why. Somewhere in all of these newsletters, it was revealed that Karen, who was an accountant, was being paid by the association for her time. Well, she's an accountant. Mike's newsletters also revealed that Karen chose the maintenance company, which was managed by Marin, Karen's sister. Wow, what a surprise! Not. The situation was getting worse. Tensions were high. Somewhere in here, the association mailed out a newsletter that claimed all the rebuttals they were mailing out were costing them a lot of money. More like $50 if you consider the postage. And it had to stop. Also, they announced that they were accepting candidates for the new election, and the form had to be mailed back in by a certain date. It was a step in the right direction, but I soon realized that we received the newsletter on a Saturday, and the deadline for submitting was the following Tuesday. Karen could easily claim that no one had sent in their forms by the deadline. Other owners told me that she'd been doing this trick for years, so she could appoint anyone that she wanted to the board. The association was using a P.O. box, and the only way to get an application in on time was to go to the post office where the box was on Monday and send a certified letter to prove that it was received in time. Fat chance. Mike and his friends had hand-delivered those newsletters. One time, I saw someone walking around the complex delivering the newsletter. I went down to retrieve it from my mailbox right away, but I also noticed that Karen was going to every mailbox, pulling these newsletters out and was throwing them into the garbage as she went. I heard her say something like it wasn't legally mailed. After that event, Mike sued to force a proper election, and the judge ordered it. For the election, we had to have a 2/3 owner majority present, either by attendance or by signed proxy. On the day of the election, many of us arrived at the meeting, and we noticed a security guard was standing by Karen, who was checking everyone in and giving them a ballot. She was expecting trouble. I heard her tell people they couldn't vote because they were in arrears with their monthly dues, had outstanding fines, or were told they weren't the official owner of record. She disqualified many people. Now, there were some arguments, but the security guard kept things civil. Note that our bylaws don't say anything about who can and can't vote, aside from the owner on record. On top of that, only a couple of candidates made it onto the ballot, excluding Mike and several others who had definitely applied. The meeting started with Karen giving some general information, and the members were talking amongst themselves a lot. Many were PO'd about being refused a ballot, and others were complaining about all the candidates missing from the ballot. One of the last bits of information was that Karen announced that she would refuse any future letters sent by certified mail because it required someone to go to the post office and acknowledge delivery on a certain date. She would normally get the mail whenever she felt like it. Karen was trying to circumvent the law by conveniently ignoring timely letters like candidate applications and our monthly dues. Some owners brought up the possibility of re-entering Mike and the other candidates onto the ballot as write-ins, and the crowd voted with him, but the board refused to recognize the vote. Lastly, the votes were collected and counted, but the board president announced that they didn't have a 2/3 majority, so the election would be canceled. We were only short a few people. The number of people Karen didn't give ballots to would have tipped the balance. Surprise! The board quickly adjourned the meeting and left before people realized what was happening. That was a fun night. No one was happy. Mike was paying out of his own pocket for his lawyer, and it was getting expensive. I heard the number $20,000 mentioned. People did help defray the cost by donating to the cause, though. Mike was not done. He went back to court another time to sue for a legal election. There was nothing in the bylaws that denied voting rights for past due balances, and Karen lied about at least one owner not being the owner of record. Armed with that information, the judge ordered another election to be supervised by an independent third-party lawyer. As I recall, the association's lawyer quit because they kept going against his advice. They replaced him with a yes man. The third-party lawyer was in complete charge of the election, including collecting candidate applications. A reasonable deadline for applications was set, 2 weeks, and proxy ballots were sent out as well. Karen's position was up for election, as were 2 other positions. We found out that the board president was appointed by Karen, but he was not an owner and had to step down. Only owners can serve on the board. Finally, the election came, and pretty much everyone showed up or had provided proxy votes. There was definitely a 2/3 majority present, not including proxy votes. The lawyer called for 3 volunteers from the owners to count the ballots. The results were that 4 new people joined the board that night. They had gotten around 80 to 90 votes each. Another active board member got 17 votes, and Karen got 15 or something like that. We presume her votes were all proxy votes. I was wondering if they were going to go after Karen for getting paid and cooking the books, but the new treasurer received everything with proper records, names this time and not numbers. The maintenance company was tossed out almost immediately. Karen sold her unit and moved to Florida, but not before arranging for some exterior beautification around her unit, complete with plant boxes, flowers, and shrubs. We think she saw the writing on the wall and moved out before any backlash could occur. The association's lawyer was also replaced. Then came the bad news. The association had to pay out almost $50,000 in legal fees to fight against Mike and his lawsuits. Since the association was paying for the lawyer, we couldn't put the bill on Karen. What a pity! We later discovered that the long-term project fund used for major upkeep of the complex was pretty badly depleted and needed to be refilled. Our lawyer advised us that for the size of the complex, it needed to be over $2 million, but there was less than $1 million in the fund. Fortunately, they didn't demand assessments, but instead raised the monthly dues to start making up the difference. In the 15 years I've been here, the dues went from $150 to $375 and go up annually now. Karen had ignored many of the longer-term projects, and in the next 2 to 3 years, the buildings were repainted, the roofs were reshingled, bad windows were replaced, and all the balconies were completely rebuilt. In more recent years, our insurance company demanded we repave the roadway because it was falling apart in places. They wouldn't insure it unless that was done immediately. These days, we have a better and more responsive maintenance company and a Facebook page for general announcements and chit-chat. There are no real winners in this case, but after all of the required improvements were done, most of us feel better living here than during the dark time of Karen's reign. The thing that just popped out right out to me out the gate is that this Karen was so corrupt. She went in wanting to win this whole election thing, but was fixing the books because she thought she could get away with it. Nobody else, until OP came along and worked with Mike and the others, had ever wanted to call her out on it. I mean, she was an accountant. She does bookkeeping work. She knows numbers. That's her strength. So of all the people to be attempting this, she was the most likely candidate to do it. Now the crazy part is she had all this planned out and was breaking and fixing these elections. But when OP and the crew came in, they saw what it was really worth, tore all that apart, had a proper election, and just destroyed her from the HOA and ruined her completely. Unfortunately, they didn't have more of a positive end, but hey, it's positive enough when the Karen gets put in her place and knocked out of the way. Way to go, OP. My HOA experience, posted by Lil Bit Evil. I'm a 41-year-old male. At an experienced age of 25 years and a bachelor, I grew tired of living in a low-rent apartment surrounded by less than lawful individuals and decided that a mortgage at the time would be only a little more per month and would make a great investment. Oh, to go back in time and give myself a talk, because what I learned was that living in an HOA only makes you a glorified renter. At the end of the day, you own nothing. The condo I purchased was very nice. 1,300 square foot, 3-bedroom, 2-bath, vaulted ceilings, thick walls. I was pretty impressed with myself. Unfortunately, the HOA was not well managed. The board was nothing more than puppets for the management company, who might as well have been the landlord. It was a large HOA, 26 buildings with 12 units each. I learned in comparison to friends that this was a good thing, as it meant assessment fees were more spread out. When I moved in, I didn't know about assessment fees and I was barely educated on the HOA fee. One of the selling points was the low HOA fee, only $80 a month. But later I found out that the developer, who was still finishing the last 4 buildings, supplemented the fee to keep it low so he could sell more units. I also didn't know that my HOA was a sub-HOA, which means that it was an HOA inside of an HOA. So I had to pay the master HOA another $25 a month to do nothing at all, literally nothing but the privilege of living in an HOA that was part of a collection of other HOAs. The sub-HOAs did all the internal maintenance, and the city itself took care of the HOA communal areas like the public roads. Meanwhile, my sub-HOA board was full of out-of-state South Californians in a snow-heavy state. My first year there, they budgeted $2,000 for snow removal and $45,000 for beautification, which was like new wood chips and remodeling the clubhouse. Meanwhile, the snow removal fee came to $35,000. At the HOA meeting to vote on how to pay this $35,000 snow fee, they banned anyone from talking about how we got into that mess and how anyone who did it was arrested for disorderly conduct by the police standing by, on request of the management company. Eventually, they voted on an assessment fee which came to about $350-ish for each unit. Later I learned the plow company was owned by the management company owner's relative. That plow guy came out if there was barely a visible frost on the ground and charged us $100 per push every time he backed up and drove forward. Eventually, the HOA board was replaced and they replaced the management company with a new company. The new company liked to play with the pool keys and charge you to turn them back on. They always tried to claim your card was read at the pool during an unauthorized time, or that card that you were using was a fake that they didn't issue. The 2008 recession hit without selling the last of the units. The developer backed out of supplementing the fees, and the fee jumped $65 and then $10 the next year. Probably even higher later, but I moved out. The developer screwed up and didn't have room to give the last building or so their 2 parking spots, which one was covered. So now the HOA wanted to revoke everyone's second spot. Problem, the second spot was on my mortgage and bylaws provided for a second spot. The HOA dropped the revoked spot idea, but I do not know how they eventually solved it. Last, I overpaid my HOA every month for dues, placing me several hundred over as insurance against the next assessment fee. So I paid a little amount for the HOA to install a screen on my dryer vent to keep the birds out against my credit. I also paid for several upgrades inside to sell the place. Unfortunately, when I tried to sell, the recession was at its worst, and I sold at a loss to get out of there and buy a house. The last insult of this HOA was to claim that I never paid for the screen on my dryer vent and that I owed a few hundred in back HOA fees. If I didn't pay, they would place a lien on me, which would mess with the condo I sold and the house I was buying. So I paid the ransom and I walked away from that dumpster fire. The good news is the house I bought was no HOA and has tripled in value. I do know the master HOA was eventually sued by all the sub-HOAs and dissolved because they did nothing but rent an office down the street. I've also ran into people who still own in my old sub-HOA, and yes, the fee is now much higher. See, here's the thing. People say HOA stands for Homeowners Association, but it's really like Whore Association, right? Because you hear all of these stories of how they're just grubbing out for money, and then all of the users just pay their dues and keep going, just oblivious to everything going on around them. But then you have OP stepping in, and they know, hey, this isn't right. This shouldn't be this way. Oh, they're coming in saying, oh, it's going to be only this little bit for snow plowing fees, and it's $35,000, and then they charge more for pushing it up and back again. That's just crazy that they actually do that, right? So then OP just knows what's going on, is more wiser to it, knows to get out of there, make an escape exit plan, and just move somewhere else. Unfortunately, moving there, not knowing what he was getting into, but going older and wiser and getting out of there before it got too crazy even more. Because it's still much higher. The fee is still much higher, he said. Way to go, OP, on getting out of there. Lesson learned. I led a revolution against our petty HOA board, posted by Deleted. My wife and I moved into a 64 townhome community that was 10 years old at the time. The HOA board was comprised of 5 members that were original homeowners when the community started and had been the sole board members since the community started. Their sense of entitlement was that crazy. They thrived on their quarterly walkthrough of the neighborhood as they would write up every single home for some kind of violation, regardless of how minor the offenses were. Everyone gets a violation letter. Our first letter, the first month living there, was that our garage door paint was starting to peel. It was a 2-centimeter scrape where the panels met. It needed to be repainted. The siding needed to be power washed. There was a patch of green moss behind a bush, and the sliding door on the deck was dirty. There was dirt on the bottom of the door from recent rain, and it needed to be washed. We had 30 days to fix the issues or begin accruing a fee of $25 a day until they are resolved. I asked around, and everyone gets these ridiculously petty letters every quarter. No matter what you did to maintain your townhome, you were going to get a letter about something. As this was going on, none of the major items the neighborhood needed fixed were addressed. After a decade since the construction, the ground had settled unevenly and many homes had standing water issues where it wouldn't drain after a storm. The rainwater would sit for 5 to 7 days in people's lawns. And more importantly, there had been a legal fight with the town since the community was started about our road being dedicated, meaning the town was responsible for snow removal. Our HOA dues included paying for our own snow removal, which we shouldn't have to, and we were paying an attorney for 10 years to fight this with no resolution in sight. Fast forward 2 years, and a few of us had enough and decided to band together to replace the board at the next annual meeting. The existing board got wind of this and hit us all with pages worth of issues with our properties, since if you have outstanding issues, you are not in good standing with the community, thus cannot run for a board position or even vote for those running. This petty move brought the community even closer, and we all spent the weekend before the meeting helping each other clean out their HOA honeydew list. We took pictures, documented everything. Then we had the US Mail certified delivery of each packet with the completed list and photos to the HOA board who lived 75 feet away. Come board night, oddly enough, the lawyer was there to give an update that no progress has been made with the township on dedicating our road. He stuck around as we moved to the elections for the next board. We brought our signed petitions to add our names to the ballot. The board says we're not eligible as we all have outstanding issues with our property. We call BS with our receipts from the post office that they received our completed list with documentation. They reply that they haven't reviewed them yet. We tell them that's not our problem and we are in good standing. The lawyer overhearing this states that we are eligible to be on the ballot if we can confirm the issues with our homes were resolved prior to the meeting. The HOA president glares at the lawyer, but the lawyer just shrugs, saying, the rules are the rules. With the exception of the 5 existing board members voting for themselves or each other, we are voted in nearly unanimously to replace them. I lead the revolution because I was tired of the petty BS when there were real problems in the neighborhood. Sadly, the rest of the elected board members vote me as president. I have no idea what I'm doing. But we spent the next few sessions removing all the dumb violations from most of the neighbors. We went through the bylaws to really focus on what's important. What happens next? Ends up that the lawyer was a friend of the previous president and was in no hurry to resolve anything as he was enjoying our excessive bill. I notify him if it's not resolved in the next 6 months, we're finding new representation. He was actually good at his job when pressed to do it. He won the case. The town appealed and tried to drag it out. He fast-tracked the appeal as it had been going on for 10 years, and we won the appeal too. The town dedicated our road, and then the lawyer pressed that it should have been done years ago. It wasn't him slowing things down, but the town. He ends up getting us a settlement from the judge for back pay on us paying the snow removal that the town was responsible for. We ended up using that settlement to have French drains installed across much of the community to clear the standing water issues. With the money left over, we fixed a lot of the neighborhood issues that the HOA should have been doing the whole time. Fences and sidewalks in disrepair, replaced dead trees and shrubs, and so on. Yeah, it was great getting all of that done without having to hit our capital reserve fund. I remained president until we moved a few years ago. Our family began to outgrow the townhome, and now we live in a new, larger development with a new HOA. I was asked to run for a position on it, and I replied, not a frickin' chance, but I will lead a coup if I need to. An update on the HOA president. One minor update on what happened to the former HOA president that I replaced. The original HOA president, a 50-year-old male, wasn't actually eligible to be president. He wasn't on the mortgage. The townhome was in his mom's name. No one knew because he held the books. The best was at the next annual meeting. He shows up with his petition to try and get his position back. I tell him in front of the other 60-plus homeowners that he can't even be at the meeting, let alone vote or be on a ballot, as his name isn't on the property. But his mom is eligible if she wants to. That was embarrassing enough for the entitled little jerk. See, this is a story of rising up and saying, hey, there's a problem here. We are being taken advantage of, and this needs fixed. So rather than sitting by, having that bystander effect, as it's called, waiting for someone else to do the job, OP says, you know what? Alright guys, let's get on this. Let's make this happen. Let's infiltrate, seek, and destroy. And he gets elected president when he actually didn't plan to be, but you know what? He did what he had to do and he ran with it. And thankfully the lawyer stepped in after that 10-year delay. 10 years, that's a long time, that's a decade. And then the old president comes back, find out he's not even supposed to be involved at all, much less the president in the first place, and OP just destroys him in front of everyone. Way to go, OP. HOA calling the police on us, posted by Saturn Decay. I have a huge headache because my mom's been upset about this for the past 4 days. It's been really frustrating to be around, but if anybody has any advice for me, I'd be forever grateful. We are in a Florida HOA. So basically, we've been living in this condominium for the past 15 years and have never had any HOA issues up until about a year ago when this young guy got hired by our president to clean up and around the condominium. Just basic labor stuff, like picking up trash and pressure washing roads. He quickly joined the HOA and befriended the president and other members and joined himself, which is where an issue arose. Because a few months later, after the fact, they sent a notice to raise HOA fees and start 2 special assessments going up to about $120 increase from that year alone, which was absolutely astronomical and with almost no precedent for us to pay the special assessments earlier. Adding insult to injury, they began doing contracting projects that to me felt very useless, such as like a $200,000 project of replacing the gates from the windows at the condominium, which have always been slightly decorative. I always felt his membership was at odds with his work because he contracts himself to work on the condominium at this point, and at this point in time has become a realtor and has started using his HOA membership status to ask owners to sell their houses to him. So I, 21, started going to HOA meetings, and I live in a predominantly Latino condominium. The meetings are always held in Spanish, which is fine because I'm from Cuba, so it's not an issue for me. Most of the people that show up, which is about 15 from a condo of 150 plus people, are this friend group of 70-something retirees. That first HOA meeting that I went to went great, and I went house by house in my condo to alert people so that they'd show up for what I believed was an important meeting that was going to affect a lot of people. And at the time, a lot of people sided with me that we needed to discuss these assessments further. The HOA board was deeply angry with me, but because it went off so smoothly and so many people that showed up agreed with me, they relented. They told us that as long as we agreed to the $20 increase, we could discuss the assessments further. But this discussion never happened. And they approved the assessments alone via a Zoom meeting that most of these older women could not attend because of technological limitations. Furthermore, they did not allow any non-members to speak in the Zoom meeting, so that went. By the second meeting, much less people showed up, and the board was allowed to pass the assessments with no questions asked. I was very frustrated, and at some points, I raised my tones as some of the old ladies who were friends with the HOA board members said some very rude things, like we deserve to have our fees raised as we are bad people. And at one point in English, I said freaking to emphasize something that I said, but a lot of these people, since they don't understand English, understood that I was personally telling them to go freak themselves. I regret letting that get out of hand, but you can imagine how much a $100 increase in unneeded fees hurts. My mother, who was with me at the time, also took it quite personally and insulted some of the few old ladies that were showing up for these meetings. Nothing crazy, just like general old people beef like you're ugly and your hair is fake. I expressly told her not to, but she really does not listen to me ever, so what can I do about that? Anyway, by that meeting, the HOA board and the people who support them expressed open hostility towards us. In time, they would start doing the gates replacement, but the issue with that, so the gates don't fit into the walls without damaging hurricane shutters, so basically anybody that has hurricane shutters basically had them abused to put those gates up. Our hurricane shutters got painted with some rust paints left on the floor, and we had nobody to ask about this. I had been contacting the management association for about a week prior to get some answers on what would happen to our hurricane shutters, but no answers. Of course, I never went to ask the HOA board members because they hate us pretty openly. And now, I just want to explain, since this is a close-knit condominium, HOA members have always had an open door policy with HOA members where you could just stop by their houses to ask them about the things happening in the condominium. However, I stopped by the president's house about a month earlier, and she told me she was resigning and, like in a lot of emotion, told me that she was doing it because of my 1. Us constantly questioning her decisions and putting people against her at meetings. 2. My mom bothering her and asking her questions. I went to go tell my mom immediately not to go to this lady's house anymore and not to bother her because she seemed extremely upset. But now that the gates thing happened and we had nobody to ask and our hurricane shutters were getting increasingly damaged, my mom, without my knowledge, stopped by her house to ask about it. She wasn't home, and her 17-year-old twin sons were, so my mom told them to contact their mom so she could ask them about the shutters. 2 things proceeded to happen. 1. This lady's ex-husband called my mom and basically told her to stay away, but it ended in a friendly manner, although my mom did cry. 2. This lady then contacted the police on my mom. The police basically just talked to my mom really rudely, normal police stuff like don't stop by people's houses, she's not the HOA president anymore, blah blah blah. It was super uncalled for. But then the issue became that the HOA board member who self-contracts the young guy who came a year ago, the one that was also a realtor, basically tried to turn this about our meetings and coming to the HOA meetings saying that we were violent and that we need to stop knocking on people's doors. The issue with that is that door knocking was how I got anyone to come out and show up for these HOA meetings. Because if not, it's just them and their supporters. But yeah, he used this to turn it on me complaining about the HOA at all. And now the contractors he hired for the gate works have started cutting up our hurricane shutters to fit in their gates. I went to go take a picture of the contractors cutting up our shutters from far away, and the contractor brought up the police visit and told me that if I continued to photograph his workers, he would call the police on me as well, even though I was doing it from a large distance, so it was obviously not about invading anyone's privacy. My mom is very indignant about all of this. My dad says just to lay low and ignore all this. Is there anything I can do about this? It's been a really rocky week because of it, so any help that I can get on this situation, clarity, or just second opinions would be so extremely helpful. Thank you. This is a rough one for OP because these people are wanting to get the law involved, and even if there is no precedence or no basis for getting said law involved, just the threat alone and what they could say or what they could twist around or lie about, that is intimidating enough. So OP is coming into this situation with a clear head on, knowing the goals, knowing what's going wrong, knowing what should go right, and wanting to attack that, but also getting hit with the police threats. So this is a rough situation all around, I think, and the police threats should not happen if OP is not doing something that is worthy of that call. I do want to know what you think in the comments as well. Click the compilation on your screen to continue your listening session for Entitled Karens and more. Thanks for watching this one, and see you in the next one.